Good evening. I declare the council meeting open at 6 p.m. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. This meeting today is being held on Wajak Noongar Budja, and I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I thank all past and present members of the community that have supported the city to better understand and value Noongar culture within the city of Wanneroo. I invite you to bow your head in prayer. Lord, we thank you for blessing our city, our community and our council. Guide us all in our decision-making to act fairly, without fear or favour, and with compassion, integrity, wisdom and honesty. May we show true leadership, be inclusive of all, and guide all of the city's people and many families to a prosperous future that all may share. We ask this in your name. Amen. Please note that the audio-visual proceedings of tonight's meeting will be live broadcast online with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. The broadcast of the proceedings of the meeting can be accessed live and on demand through City of Wanneroo YouTube channel. Apologies and leave of absence. Councillor Coetzee is an apology and Councillor Seif is a leave of absence. And new requests for leave of absence. Councillors, we have a new request for a leave of absence for Councillor Berry from the 8th of October to the 30th of November 2024. Do I have a mover? Councillor Miles, seconder Deputy Mayor Rowe. Councillors, could you please vote for this leave of absence? Oh, and that's passed unanimously. Oh, yes, you can vote. Yeah, yeah. So we've got 3 councillors absent at the moment, so that's an absolute, everyone's in agreement today. We go to item 3, public question time. And the following general rules apply to public question and statement time. Public questions and statements should only relate to the business of the local government and should not be a personal statement or opinion. Only questions relating to matters affecting the local government will be considered at a council meeting, and only questions that relate to the purpose of the meeting will be considered at a special council meeting. Questions may be taken on notice and responded to after the meeting. Questions may not be directed at specific council members or a city employee. Questions are not to be framed in such a way as to reflect adversely on a particular council member or a city employee. First priority will be given to persons who are asking questions relating to items on the current council meeting agenda, and second priority will be given to public statements. Only public statements regarding items on the council agenda under consideration will be heard. Each person seeking to ask questions or make a statement may address the council for a maximum of 3 minutes each. So I've got Mr. Gregory Harrison for Mariginiup, PQ01 1024. You've pre-registered to ask questions. Would you like to come to the podium and ask your questions? Thank you. Just press the button and the red light will come on and then your voice will be amplified. Thank you.
Good evening, Honourable Mayor and Councillors. Greg Harrison, Mariginiup, speaking on behalf of my father, Roger Harrison. My father has spent many years in local government Parks and Recreation Division, doing his apprenticeship at Kings Park. Over his life, he has planted approximately 5.5 million trees with my help, of course. He started Playtime Australia, the second biggest playground equipment installer in the state. We donated the only playground equipment to Wanneroo Primary School that remained there for some 30 years. We are eco-friendly, volunteering our time to save native plant species from extinction. The main point, the structure plan, is it a fact that the traffic impact assessment has not been submitted? If so, should this ring alarm bells with the council? Number 2, is the council aware that the general public, ratepayers, are not aware of the biggest public asset being moved to the public detriment of the general public? Can Council provide proof of any landholders being contacted or consulted by the new town planner? Number 4, does Council agree that if only a dozen ratepayers have been informed of the new town plan, that this does not give a broad interpretation of the meaning to advertise, making submissions of such a plan disproportional? Will Council take in consideration the recent drought last year, losing hundreds of millions of trees, many of which are Banksia, the Carnaby's parrot, main food source within the Shire alone? With the Mariginiup fires taking out hundreds of thousands of Banksias? Can the Council acknowledge the fact that many landscaping projects are failing due to the drying climate? Does the Council support the retention of the remnant bushland wherever possible in favour of replanting or rehabilitation, as may happen? Is the Council aware of Ross River virus mosquitoes in Lake Mariginiup? Does the Council Planning Department acknowledge that there may or will be a traffic flow problem with the high school students from the years 11 and 12 driving cars now and to and from the school location, as Capon Street is over capacity at the moment? Does Council have the power to hold back this for more information, i.e. traffic impact assessment, and hopefully changes to the better of the new town plan, as is not in the best interest of ratepayers as it stands? Thank you, Mayor and Councillors.
Thank you, Mr Harrison. I just want to clarify, your questions actually relate to consideration of Precinct 7 Lake Mariginiup local structure plan following advertising. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr Dixon, would you like to respond to those questions?
Thank you, Mayor. There were quite a number of questions in there. Hopefully I captured most of them, but I'm happy for Mr Harrison to repeat the questions if I don't adequately answer the points that he's raised. The first point, I think, is in relation to a traffic impact assessment. A traffic impact assessment was lodged with the initial application, and that was assessed as part of the initial proposal. As Council is aware through the report, there was a revised proposal that was submitted, and the revised proposal does not include a traffic impact assessment, and one of the modifications that administration's recommending is that that be provided by the proponent and be considered by the West Australian Planning Commission as part of its assessment. There was a question about a public asset, but I wasn't sure exactly what public asset Mr Harrison was referring to. So I wouldn't mind just some clarification on that point, if I may, Mayor.
Mr Harrison.
Public asset. Oh, yeah. In fact, the assessment. How far through, sorry, sir?
So I think it was your second question in relation to a public asset. You made a point about TIA.
Is the Council aware of the general ratepayer not being aware of the biggest public asset being moved to the detriment of the job, which is the high school?
Right, okay.
Sorry, I didn't put high school there.
So in response to that, and thank you, Mr Harrison, I think Council is aware that the high school, when originally submitted, was located in one position, and I think a plan included in the report indicates a minor relocation of the high school and the public open space associated with that. That's included in Council's report. You made a question in regard to town planner making contact. I think you're referring to Greg Rowe and Associates and whether they've made contact with the residents. That's not a requirement of the planning process. And the reason I say that is in answer to your next question, which was around consultation. So there was extensive public consultation with the initial plan that was submitted for 42 days in accordance with the planning regulations. That included all stakeholders, all landowners within Precinct 7 and key government stakeholders also. As Council is aware, there was a revised plan that was submitted and that was targeted consultation undertaken as part of that amended plan, which targeted consultation with those that were directly affected by the changes. In relation to the drought in the last year, and I'll answer that also in relation to retention of bushland. Certainly part of the proposed local structure plan is to retain as much remnant vegetation as possible within public open space. It won't be practicable to retain all native vegetation within that precinct, but the intent would be through the road reserves or through public open space to identify key areas of remnant vegetation and for that to be retained within the open space, either around the lake system or within new areas of public open space. I'll take on notice, Mayor, the question in relation to Ross River virus. I don't have an answer to that question. In terms of traffic flow, I think one of the requirements of the to be provided traffic impact assessment would be the effect of traffic numbers at junctions and on road network in and around the school, as well as the remainder of the estate, to ensure that the road network is able to accommodate traffic movements. And I do appreciate the point that you made around a lot of Year 12 students do drive to schools, and that would have to be factored into that would need to be factored into the traffic impact assessment that was undertaken in liaison with the Department of Education. The final question, does Council have the power to hold back the consideration of the structure plan until the traffic impact assessment is submitted? I think I have provided a response in writing to you on those questions, and that's been provided to Council members as well. One of the recommended modifications is, as I mentioned, is for the updated traffic impact assessment to be provided by the applicant and this to be considered by the West Australian Planning Commission. We understand that traffic modelling is imminent and that would be factored into a new traffic impact assessment. This information is intended to be provided to the state government as part of its assessment of the local structure plan and is not considered reasonable to delay Council's consideration of this matter until a TIA is provided. As Council is aware, there's a whole raft of additional information that's required for this local structure plan before it can be formally considered by the West Australian Planning Commission. We have a statutory period of 60 days from the close of the advertising to Council considering a structure plan. We've already exceeded that period given the complexities in assessing this local structure plan, and the Department of Planning and the West Australian Planning Commission has requested that the city highlight its modifications that it would require and formally consider its assessment of the structure plan and forward it to the Commission, and that's indeed what administration is recommending to Council. Mayor, I hope that answers all of the questions that you raised, but I'm happy to answer any furthers.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Do you have a point of clarification, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just on part clarification for Mr Harrison, if Mr Dixon can just outline as part of the process going forward, once Council deals with the matter, do the residents have any other agency where they can obviously make representation to?
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor. So all of the comments that were made as part of the initial and subsequent consultation will be forwarded to the West Australian Planning Commission. One of the recommendations that administration has made to Council and is part of your report this evening and recommendation is that there be further consultation undertaken by the West Australian Planning Commission, given the number of modifications and changes that are likely to be required. If that occurs, then there would be a further opportunity for the local residents to make further submissions and consider any changes to the structure plan. I must, however, point out that whilst that's a recommendation from administration and hopefully from Council, there's no guarantee that that would occur. That would be for the Commission to decide whether further consultation should occur in this instance. I'm hopeful, given that there are 54 modifications and still significant issues to resolve, that the Commission would agree with our recommendation that further consultation be undertaken.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. We now go to Rocco Caratazzolo, and I presume you want to speak to item ASO 61024, which is the response to petition PTO 1724, request to increase Verge maintenance between Patrick Court and Our Lady of Mercy Church, Girraween, and/or footpath extension. Is that correct? Go ahead, Miss. If you press the grey button in front of you, hold it down, it should work.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
yep, that's
Thank
better.
you.
Okay, can I go? Good evening, Mayor and Councillors. 7 months have passed since this issue was presented to the City of Wanneroo. The first photo shows the footpath up to the fence on the opposite side of the gate. The second shows the response from the City of Wanneroo since our request. In reference to the risk appetite statement stating that the City of Wanneroo administration is willing to accept a medium to high risk in the area where the community with more pain and suffering to the community is a neglected responsibility and duty of care. The suggestion of season weeding control shows not commitment to put a stop to the weeds and deal with the danger of the mobile scooters and general public. There is neglect when not willing to reflect on previous decisions, also ignoring the less than the 100-metre rule with enough funds that was not considered even when it was pointed out. As a community, we have built a retaining wall on our side of the fence to stop dirt and soil going onto the community hub driveway. We took care of our own issue before we asked you to take care of yours. The statements of the city website shows your Wanneroo in big letters, and the other that is states by email to Ian Barker, stating this framework provides a mechanism for the city to practice good governance and ensure that the city is able to manage as many complex legislative and governance responsibility effectively in the best interest of the community, which has since been removed from the website. As I mentioned on the 3rd of September, this problem has been going on for years. The day after, I spoke briefly to Councillor Singh. As in question time, he acknowledged that we are requesting an addition of extension only on the fence side, which is correct. The 2.5 metres wide footpath that costs $20,000 that is being used as a conflict of interest has no bearing on the issue. The future project of the community centre is also irrelevant, as yet to be agreed. The footpath is the last thing on the list of a building project. Removing the weeds and putting mulch is also cheaper and less maintenance than season weed control. Some pathways have concrete very close to the metal fences. The 400mm concrete extension is feasible. One would think that supporting the community to improve its grounds is a good thing. We hope that common sense will prevail and the City of Wanneroo stands by the statements in the best interest of the community. Is Girraween not up to the standards of respect, like Dutch, Medley, Kingsley, etc.? I must also add that most of our maintenance volunteers also volunteer to assist the struggling families in Girraween. Protecting and hiding one's iniquity is self-defeating, and in a position of trust, it compounds and causes much damage. This is our last part of the garden that we'd like to attend to and make it presentable. Be fully conscious of the choice you make. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr Caratazzolo. We have another question, question from Ros Casey. Ros, if you would like to take the podium, but I don't know which item on the agenda that you're speaking to, so if you could tell us which item.
It's not an item on the agenda.
Is it about council business?
It's about council business.
Okay, what council business? Could you come and take the podium, please? Can you initially state what council business it's referring to, Ms Casey?
It's to do with public open space planning.
Okay, you have 3 minutes, and if you would like to start asking questions, and give us the suburb that you live in. Thank you, Ms Casey.
Why is the city designing its future sport public open space as senior-sized multipurpose sports fields when the following research provides overwhelming evidence that future demands will continue to be predominantly for junior sports fields? SportsOz participation across life stages state participation in organised sport peaks from 9 to 11 years. By age of 12, when children start to transition to high school, participation in organised sport and physical activity outside of school decreases dramatically. Monash University, Time Out on Traditional Sport, September 23. Over the past decade, there has been a continued decline in organised sport participation, and the Intergeneral Review of Australian Sport report is predicting that participation will drop by a further 10% by 2030. Roy Morgan, July 2023. The starkest differences between adult and children's sport participation are for team sports, with kids over 10 times more likely to play soccer, basketball, cricket, or Australian football regularly than adults. CSIRO 2013, it has been identified that people are undertaking more informal recreational activities such as cycling, walking and running, whilst organised and team sports have held constant or declined. Coupled with smaller backyards, this change in participation is placing pressure on public open space and associated infrastructure to support more informal and ad hoc activities. The city's own community facilities planning statistics indicate the current ratio of junior to senior sports clubs within the city is over 4 to 1. Why then is city planning not designing a mix of sports field sizes that more accurately reflect the above research, and which most importantly would allow the retention of more trees in support of its urban forest strategy? Final question, is council...
Can I just get Mr Clem to respond to that question initially? Mr Clem, could you respond to that question?
Thank you, Mayor. I do have a copy of Ms Casey's questions in front of me, so I'm happy to wait till the end, Mayor, if you like, and respond in total at that point.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ms Casey.
Is council aware the 2021 census showed Merriwa has the highest percentage of 85-plus-year-olds than any other Wanneroo suburb? Merriwa has 2 neighbourhood parks. Dalvik Park has recently been redeveloped as a sport neighbourhood park with competition floodlighting for evening training and night games for senior clubs from outside the catchment area. Its only other neighbourhood park is Addison Park, and the city has developed a master plan to similarly extend the primary school over to senior size, necessitating ripping out remnant bush, removing centuries-old grass trees and cutting down mature canopy trees. Bearing in mind the vast majority of Merriwa residents are of an age unlikely to participate in organised sport, and the park is very popular with local residents for informal activities, particularly dog walking, will council, in fairness to the residents, scrap once and for all any plans to extend Addison Park playing field to senior size? Thank you. Thank
you, Ms Casey. Mr Clem.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Administration has responded to similar questions from Ms Casey on these matters previously, and the nature of those responses notes that the approach to public open space planning is informed by the city's LPP, or Local Planning Policy 4.3, public open space, as well as state planning documents such as livable neighbourhoods. And whilst these informing policies help to provide a standard approach for open space planning, they also provide scope for the local government to respond to local circumstances and requirements. And this might include considerations for things such as senior or junior sized playing fields. With respect to Addison Park in Merriwa, administration has been in contact with Ms Casey on several occasions and will continue to keep her informed about any future proposed developments at the park, and this will include opportunities to provide feedback if and when formal community consultation is conducted.
Thank you, Mr Clem. Thank you, Ms Casey. Do I have any, do you want to ask a clarification because you can't answer a question?
Thank you, Mayor.
A point of clarification.
Point of clarification. Mr Clem spoke about the local planning policy. I believe, is that up for renewal in the short distance?
Mr Clem?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure of the exact date. It is a planning department policy. I'm not sure if Mr Dixon knows, but he might be able to shed some light on that.
Mr Dixon?
I'll take on notice the exact date of review. I think the policies, local planning policies, are typically reviewed once every 4 years, or if it's required to be reviewed sooner, it can be reviewed sooner by administration. So I'll take that on notice and give council an exact date.
Do you have a point of clarification, Deputy Mayor Rowe?
I do, Mayor Aitken. The other document that influences the potential upgrades and development of parks is the Active Reserve Master Plan. Is the administration able to provide Ms Casey with some clarification of if that document is subject to review in the near future and what participation there'd be from either the elected group or also the wider residential community?
Mr Clem?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, for the question. Yes, that's correct. The Active Reserve Master Plan, we are bringing that back to Council soon for some reconsiderations of the projects and the master plans that are listed in that document. That will include some discussion on Addison Park.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from anyone in the auditorium for this evening? If there are no further questions, we go to the next item of the agenda, which is item 4, confirmation of minutes. Do I have a mover and seconder to confirm the minutes of ordinary council meeting held on the 10th of September 2024? Councillor Wright, move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Huntley. Councillor Wright, do I have any speakers against the ordinary council minutes? If there are no speakers against, do you want a right to speak to it? You happy? Okay, so councillors, please cast your vote. And the minutes are passed unanimously. Announcements by myself without discussion. My council colleagues and I are pleased to congratulate Councillor Jordan Wright on his recent successful completion of the Walga Diploma of Local Government elected member. The diploma is a nationally recognised qualification and is the highest level of training offered by Western Australian Local Government Association. And I'd just like to congratulate Councillor Wright this evening. I'm also pleased to advise that Aquamotion has won a national award at SwimCon 24, the annual convention for swim, which is the national peak body for swim coaches, teachers and swim schools. Aquamotion has won the Best Swim School Innovation Team Staff Development Award in recognition of Aquamotion's ongoing professional development provided to staff through specialist collaboration, expert-led workshops, training opportunities, custom e-learning content, instructor training for specialist teaching programs and team building initiatives. SWIM represents over 50,000 individual members throughout Australia and internationally and has over 600 member swim schools nationwide. The City of Wanneroo's Aquamotion being one of those. Those swim schools collectively deliver lessons to over 600,000 families each week. SWIM is the largest network for the Learn to Swim industry in Australia, and the annual awards are presented to Australia's top coaches, teachers and swim schools, and we won. So, congratulations to the Aquamotion team, and I have your award here. Who is going to come and get it? Really proud of everyone at the City of Wanneroo and what they're achieving. It's really exciting when we can celebrate our successes together. Item 6, questions from council members. Do we have any questions from council members this evening? If we have no questions from council members, we move to item 7, petitions. There are no new positions to be presented. Item 8, reports. Declarations of interest by council members, including the nature and extent of which the interest are to be made at the commencement of the item to which the interest relates. Declarations of interest forms are to be completed and handed to the Chief Executive Officer. We now go to Planning and Sustainability, Strategic Land Use Planning and Environment, PSO 11024. The Alkimos-Eglinton Development Contribution Plan, Annual Review of Costs 24-25. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Figg, seconded Councillor Parker. Councillor Figg, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Mayor. I think the report is pretty well sums it up. Thank you.
Councillor Parker, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. Happy with the report as is.
Thank you. Any speakers against? If there are no speakers against, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to PSO 2-1024, the Yanship and Two Rocks Development Contribution Plan Annual Review of Costs 2024-25. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Figg, seconded Councillor Miles. Councillor Figg, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Mayor. Again, it pretty much speaks for itself. I would note, though, that there's only one remaining item on this to be completed, so it's an exciting time for Yanship and Two Rocks.
Absolutely. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this item? Any speakers against? If there are no speakers against, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to PS 03-1024, consent to advertised East Wanneroo Cells 1 to 9 Developer Contribution Arrangement Annual Review of Costs 2024-25. Do I have a mover? Councillor Miles. Do I have a seconder for this item? Councillor Wright. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this item?
I'm happy with the report the way it's presented. Thank you, Mayor.
Would you like to speak to this item? Do I have any speakers against this item? There are no speakers against this item. Councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We go to PSO 4-1024, consideration of Precinct 7 Lake Mariginiup Local Structure Plan following advertising. Do I have a mover for this report? Councillor Miles. Do I have a seconder for this report? Councillor Huntley. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this report?
Yeah, thank you.
Just a moment. Councillor Huntley wants to make a declaration on this report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. With regard to this item, PSO 4-1024, consideration of Precinct 7 Lake Mariginiup Local Structure Plan following the advertising, I disclose that for me, I am actually in Precinct 6, and as a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected, and I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just briefly, I would just like to ask administration one question. Whilst council's dealing with this and if all approved goes off to where it needs to go up into the Planning Commission, can any of the landowners within this Precinct 7 can they, if they wish to, put an amendment in at any time in the future?
Mr Dixon?
Just for clarification, an amendment to the local structure plan whilst it's being considered or after it's being approved or considered by the Commission? After it's been approved by or considered by the Commission.
Mr Dixon?
Through you, Mayor, anybody can propose an amendment to a structure plan, whether it's a landowner or any other stakeholder. That would go through the normal planning process. Typically, a developer that has control over a structure plan would be the person or the group that would make any amendments, but that it's not restricted to just the developer of the land. It could be any person that chooses to put forward an amendment that can be considered.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to this item,
Yes,
Councillor
thank you, Mayor. I am happy with the administration's report and also with the host of recommendations to the Commission for further follow-up and advice, and I do hope that they look at those carefully and obviously consider those recommendations on behalf of our community, because this item has been out for some time, as the Director indicated earlier. One plan went out and pretty much the community was happy with it. It's only when it was amended that we actually had a lot of residents and landowners that were unhappy with some of those amended plans. I know we then went out to do some supplementary consultation. That's all in the report, hence why all the recommendations that are listed by the planning, our planning team, and obviously endorsed by us. I truly hope that the Commission will take them on board on behalf of us and our community. With that, Mayor, I'm happy to put this forward to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Huntley, do you want to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any speakers against this item? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. Just in regards to this item, I wanted to speak in against. I'm happy with the majority of the report and the modifications that have been proposed. However, there are 2 points that make it hard for me from a governance perspective to be able to support this going to the WAPC. One of those considerations is sort of along the lines of what Mr Harrison has spoken around the traffic impact assessment. I understand I understand the administration's comment, and I also understand the state government's comment around that this will be addressed at a later stage. However, as highlighted tonight, it is up to the WAPC if they choose to reconsult with the community. And to me, I just don't think that, I guess, with those changes of having a better consultation method for precinct plans, particularly of this size. I know Council had a lot of interest when it came to precinct 15 around traffic, and also when the developer district contribution plan came to Council, there was a lot of interest around traffic and how that impacts current residents but also future residents, and I think that's quite important for us to take that into consideration. I understand that majority of the changes are unaffected, however there are a few major routes that have been changed since been updated, so I do think that is quite critical. The other part that I wanted to highlight is around the developers offering to do an urban greening strategy as a trade-off for the local planning policy 5.3. And I guess the reason behind that is a lot of community consultation went into that local planning policy, as well as the place statement that we came up with at the East Wanneroo community reference group, and that policy was consulted with all those residents. We came to a agreed solution that this policy was fit for purpose to provide that vision for the East Wanneroo area, and I just think, you know, obviously the developers have another plan, that's fine, but that vision has been set by Council and the local community to make sure we stick to and enforce that local planning policy 5.3. And just to finish off my reasoning for not supporting this item tonight is just in regards to, I guess, that governance principle of making an informed decision. I just don't feel like without that transport impact assessment that I can personally make an informed decision without having that critical document. I understand there is political pressure from governments and developers to get housing on the ground, but when it comes to planning, I believe we should be doing this properly. And the state government needs to acknowledge that East Wanneroo is a challenging area and that the statutory timeframe is not appropriate for items of this size. And at the end of the day, we have one opportunity to get it right, because once things are on the ground, it's a massive backlog to try and clean everything up. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Do I have a speaker for this item? I'm just going to give an opportunity if there's any other councillors to speak against it. Councillor Smith, do you have a question or do you want... Yes, Councillor Smith.
Just a question around time frame expected for that traffic assessment, if there's any ballpark. Thanks.
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Mayor, I don't have a definitive time frame. I think, as I mentioned in response to questions from Mr Harrison, there's still an area of work around preparing a district model, traffic model for the East Wanneroo district structure plan area. That's imminent. That document will be used as an input to finalising a traffic impact assessment. So it's dependent on the traffic modelling being completed and then a consultant utilising that information, then applying it to the context of Precinct 7. So I would imagine that would probably take at least 3 to 4 months. As I mentioned earlier, there are a host of other issues such as district groundwater drainage that still needs to be resolved. There's a whole range of other complex planning issues that still need to be addressed as part of the assessment of this local structure plan that would need to be assessed by the Commission. Councillor
Smith, you have another question?
Yes, I'd just like the opportunity for admin to respond to Councillor Wright's comments, I guess, in terms of the governance, but also the consequences if, for example, a procedural motion was put in to delay, just to reiterate what those potential consequences or the trade-off is. Thanks.
Okay, the administration can't comment on Councillor Wright's statement because that would be entering into debate. The procedural motion?
Probably worth asking Mr Dixon if there was a procedural motion to defer, the impact that would have in terms of the planning time.
Yeah, what would be the impact of a procedural motion to defer this item?
So I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a statutory time frame for councils to consider local structure plans. So following the advertising period, the 60 days in which for council to make a recommendation to the West Australian Planning Commission. That time period is well and truly passed. And the Commission has indicated through the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage that they are requesting that the city make a recommendation to them in terms of changes, modifications to the plan. The risk is that if we don't do that, the Commission will just ask for the structure plan to be forwarded to them without a recommendation from Council. They have the powers under the planning regulations to do that. So hence the reason for bringing the report to Council, albeit with a list of 54 modifications on issues that still need to be addressed.
So, Mr Dixon, what you're saying is there were 60 days for us to respond and we're over the 60 days and we are in a grace period at the moment. If we don't get back from this council meeting, they'll just go ahead with it as it is without our recommendations. Is that correct?
That is certainly a risk, Mayor. If Council chooses to defer this item, there's a risk that the Commission will just ask that the matter be forwarded to them and they will continue with their assessment.
So and that means we wouldn't get any input in it. Is that correct, Mr Dixon?
Certainly there wouldn't be a formal council resolution, Mayor.
Councillor Smith.
May I speak for it, please? While I acknowledge what Councillor Wright, his concerns, my concern is I think the administration has done a great job in terms of the recommendations that it's got in there. So I would prefer it to go forward with those than defer it and not have be addressed by WAPC. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Do I have any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, Councillor Miles, would you like the right of reply? Okay, councillors, please cast your vote. And that item is passed. 11 councillors supporting it, one of them not supporting it. Councillor Wright is not supporting it. We now go to Assets and Operations and Services, AS 01 1024, Council Policy Review on Bus Stop Infrastructure Policy. Do I have a mover and seconder? Ah, yes, Deputy Mayor Rowe. Do I have a seconder for bus stops? Infrastructure. Councillor Herridge. Deputy Mayor Rowe, would you like to speak to this item?
I would, Mayor, I would. Council knows how passionate I am as an advocate for bus shelter infrastructure. This might not be the type of asset that costs millions of dollars to build, but the importance that it has for local residents should not be understated. This type of infrastructure along our local roads, along our distributor roads, it protects people from our pretty heavy rainfall conditions in the winter and also our very warm weather and the sun rays in the summer. I think the discussion that we've had throughout, which is around ensuring more bus shelters are constructed, is important. I think the discussion we've had around advocating to our state and federal members and major political party candidates is also important. They want to be able to see assets delivered for our community as well. And I think the other discussion, which I look forward to having at budget time next year, is around trying to see if the revenue collected from advertising of bus shelters can be protected so that money is reinvested back into the asset that is generating the revenue in the first place. We want to see more of this type of infrastructure, and if there's a way to make that happen through the budget process rather than the policy process itself, I'm totally supportive of that. So I commend the report to the Council.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Rowe. Councillor Herridge, would you like to speak to this item?
I think Deputy Mayor just about covered everything.
Are there any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, Deputy Mayor, would you like the right of reply?
Only to say that I found it difficult to speak while all that noise was going on outside, but yes.
Okay, councillors, cast your vote. That was passed unanimously. We now go to ASO 2-1024, Council Policy Review, Local Area Traffic Management Policy. Do I have a mover and seconder for this? Moved, Councillor Wright. Seconder? Councillor Parker. Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess only to add my comments around, obviously with my questioning last week, I'm satisfied that the policy is well put together, and I think the issue seems to be around the funding allocation to be able to do more in that space. So I thank the Traffic Services team and the Director for updating this policy. And I look forward to having that discussion around the budget and long-term financial plan workshop. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Herridge, would you like to speak to this item? Oh, Councillor Parker, sorry. I was looking at the top one, not the bottom one.
No, I think just to add that particularly number 4 is a bit of a thing of mine at the moment with additional state funding for traffic treatments and other measures. I really think it's really important, and I'm really grateful that that is in this report. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Are there any speakers against this policy review? If there are no speakers against, councillors, please cast your vote. And that was passed unanimously. We now go to ASO 31024, Council Policy Review, Pathways Policy. Do I have a mover and seconder for the Pathways Policy? Councillor Wright, seconded Councillor Parker. Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to our Pathways Policy? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I did have one question on this item, if I can, first, before I speak. And it was just in regards to clarification of my question last week with the Director's response in regards to B trip generators and the number of properties within an 800-metre walkable catchment. I'm just wanting to make sure that this clause that's now in the policy doesn't disadvantage established areas that may have bigger property sizes as opposed to newer areas on smaller lots.
Mr Singh?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. That's not the intention of the policy to discriminate any particular areas.
Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to this item?
Thank you, Mayor. If that's the case, I'm supportive of the policy. A lot of work has gone into it to be able to make sure that it is fit for purpose going forward. And as highlighting my comments before, it would be awesome to increase that level of funding that council provides for this area. I know footpath requests are very popular amongst all of our wards throughout the city, and obviously finalising those missing pathway links, which can be really annoying for people trying to get around, but also highlighting the Councillor Parker and Deputy Mayor Rowe's comments as well, to be able to request members of Parliament and candidates to be able to help alleviate our budget pressures, but also to demonstrate that working together to be able to make sure our community is a good place to live. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Parker, would you like to speak to this item?
Nothing further to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any speakers against? If there are no... Councillor Miles has a question.
The question is because of an item we do have on a bit later on. Within the policy, Mayor, if I could ask administration, does the policy give administration the capacity to widen a footpath without removing the existing pathway? Can it just do another extension in situ?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The policy does not specifically mention that kind of circumstance, but the policy does consider the upgrades and new pathways and under the same scoring criteria.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against, councillors, please cast your vote. And that was passed unanimously. We now go to ASO 41024, response to petition PT 0724, request for carers and elderly to park on the concrete area next to driveway 59 at 59 Westport Parade, Dash. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Herridge, seconded Councillor Parker. Councillor Herridge, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just quickly, just to thank admin for including the additional photo that we asked for last week, and for the assets and planning team. I believe there was quite a few of us that were on the phone discussing this item, so that was fantastic. Thank you. I think there's a good outcome here for our resident. We've updated the recommendation to include the admin to liaise with the petitioner to facilitate the parking permit. So I think this is actually a good outcome. We don't change what is already in situ. We're just trying to guide and help so it doesn't actually affect anything further in the future for anybody else. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Herridge. Councillor Parker, would you... Oh, do you have a question, Councillor Bedworth? Ask a question. Oh, wait a minute. I'll let Councillor Parker speak to it first and then you ask a question.
No, very much on the same lines as Councillor Herridge, and just thanks to administration for going the extra mile. And I think this is a really good outcome for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Councillor Bedworth, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Mayor, and through yourself, I'd just like to know, in the event that the parking permits are implemented, will that mean an upgrade of the street signage to indicate permit holders only, to prevent other people seeing vehicles parked, not necessarily seeing a permit on the dash and then copying?
Thank you. Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We'll consider that if that's required at that particular site. Our initial plan is to meet with the petitioner and discuss it with them. And then if there's a non-compliance they will request them to report it to us rather than being there on regular basis, which we can't afford to be there every time. So we will just rely on the resident to report any non-compliance in the first place.
Thank you, Mr Singh. Do I have any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to item ASO 5-1024, response to petition PTO 3-824, the petition for existing green space on Inspiration Drive, Wangara, to be converted into parking bays. Do I have a mover and seconder for the substantive? Deputy Mayor Rowe, do I have a seconder for the substantive? Councillor Bedworth. Now, Councillor Wright, I shouldn't be preempting this, should I? Councillor Wright, do you have an amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I was going to let the Speaker Speaker and Seconder speak, but I'm happy to introduce this because I think it just adds value. It doesn't change it at all. Just in regards to my amendment, in regards to adding a 6th point, which is for administration to prepare a project proposal to undertake the preparation of a parking strategy for the next financial year, just for the Wangara industrial area. And I think the relevant importance of this is to provide an overall framework that outlines some plans and programs that we can do to improve parking in this area. And I did include some links if any council members did have a chance to have a look. I understand that those ones are more a city-wide approach to parking strategy, but I understand that probably where we get the most frustration is within our industrial areas, and I think if we can set up a really good framework for Wangara, Neerabup and the East Wanneroo industrial areas should be able to follow a similar light, so we've got that framework in place. So, and I think that will also assist hopefully the ward councillors when they do get residential inquiries as well. When it comes to businesses and residents wanting to find parking bays, that we actually have a decent plan that is funded in the budget to be able to improve parking, whether that be through physical modifications or other strategies that are covered within that document. I think it will definitely make Wangara a better place to work for people. So definitely commend this to council, and hopefully we're able to get a good strategy to help improve this for local businesses and employees that work in Wangara.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Before we go to your seconder, I just want to ask Deputy Mayor Rowe and Councillor Bedworth if you're happy to accept the amendment in the substantive, or we'll go to Councillor Miles to speak as a seconder.
Apologies for sort of crossing over debate. I don't want to deny Councillor Miles the right to speak to it if he has something that he thinks will add great value to this debate. So it is a great debate. Look, Mayor, I am happy to accept it as part of the substantive, subject to Councillor Bedworth agreeing the same.
Okay. Would you like the opportunity to speak to it as well quickly now, Councillor Miles, to give you that opportunity?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that. Look, just briefly, it was clear after our discussions last week in a briefing that we probably have overlooked the industrial area as far as having some sort of new plan for parking. We know that when we all go down there now, it's far more retail orientated than it ever was. And I think because of that, parking in some areas of the estate are at a high premium, and you end up double parking, over parking, and doing all sorts of things you wouldn't ordinarily doing. So I'm very happy for administration to prepare the report and project proposal and asked that council support the amendment. Or no, it's now part of the substantive going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Deputy Moreau, would you like to speak to the substantive as amended? Thank you.
No, thank you, Mayor. I believe the comments made in regard to the amendment speak for themselves.
Councillor Bedworth, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Bedworth. Are there any speakers against the substantive as amended? If there are no speakers against the substantive as amended, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to AS 06 1024, response to petition PTO 1 724, request to increase Verge maintenance between Patrick Court and Our Lady of Mercy Church at Girraween and/or footpath extension. Do I have a mover and seconder for this? We have a declaration from Deputy Mayor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. Just before you go to the mover and the seconder, with regard to this item being AS 06 10/24, I disclose that the lead petitioner is known to me, as we both volunteer at the same church, being Our Lady of Mercy Catholic Church. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Rowe. Do I have a mover and seconder for the response to this petition? Councillor Smith and Councillor Parker. Councillor Smith, would you like to speak to this item?
Just briefly to say that I think the administration's recommendations are suitable, and so I'm happy to support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Parker, would you like to speak to this?
Nothing further to add. Thank you, Mayor.
Are there any speakers against the recommendation? I have a question from Councillor Deputy Mayor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. Just for the clarity of some of the comments that the administration's made throughout the report, one of the recommendations speaks to investigating the implementation of a seasonal weed control program. Can I ask the administration, if the recommendation is successful tonight, when they intend to meet with the lead petitioner? That's the first question, Mayor.
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My understanding is the meeting has been organised in the anticipation of this council decision later this week.
Thank you. Do you have another question, Deputy Mayor? And then I'll go to you, Mr Bedworth.
If there's some potential additional comments that the admin could make, the implementation of a seasonal weed control program, I know that they'd need to have the meeting with the petitioner, but what could that potentially look like? The petitioner also raised the possibility of mulching that side of the verge that connects the footpath to the property boundary. Could that be included as part of those discussions?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. The seasonal weed control require us to use some kind of chemical treatment as it required on that particular site. If that is not successful, then we can consider other options.
Thank you. Councillor Bedworth, you have a question.
Yeah, I'll try to frame it as a question. Through yourself, Mayor, if in the recommendation, I don't have a problem with it per se on the whole, but my concern is the word consider the implementation. Can I get some more explanation around what the term consider might mean in these circumstances?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I think the reason the way it's worded is that so that we can have a discussion with the petitioner on site and implement the suitable measure to control the weeds in the area between the footpath and the fence. That's the reason it says consider. And moreover, this is quite operational in nature. That's why we worded this that way.
Do you have a question, Deputy Mayor Rowe?
It's a potential amendment, Mayor, and I apologies it hasn't been foreshadowed. It actually has just come about as a result of this line of questioning, so it might add some value. I can read it aloud, Mayor, if you'd like, and then to see if the mover and the seconder are happy to incorporate.
Yeah, that would be fine, Deputy
So
Mayor.
it would be to add a new number 4. So it's not to replace anything. It's just to add an additional recommendation between the existing number 3 and number 4. And, Mayor, it would say, requests administration provides council with a written update on the implementation of the seasonal weed control program by the end of 2024. And I can repeat that if that would assist.
Thank you. Would the mover and seconder be happy to consider that as part of the substantive? We're going to get it written up on the
Thank you, Mayor. That is correct. I don't know if you wanted me to speak to it or to add any reasons.
I think the mover and seconder are happy to add it to the substantive. Is the mover and seconder, Councillor Smith and Councillor Parker, are you happy to add the amendment to the substantive?
I'm happy with that amendment, but I just will note that it doesn't address Councillor Bedworth's concern, as far as I know, but that may be come through in another amendment.
Councillor Bedworth?
I'm happy with that in so much as at least we will get some feedback as to the word considered by the end of this year. And it gives us as the council more security around the fact that all options will be considered, ruled out or ruled in, implicate or eliminate, I suppose. So, yeah, I'm comfortable with that. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Smith, you happy with the substantive as amended to incorporate that into you moving it?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Parker, are you the same?
I am, and I was actually happy with the word considered, because I know when I look at it, I am just a little bit nervous that if we just go and spray poison on the one side of the fence, it's going to go through to the other side where obviously, you know, you're trying to grow stuff. So I'm happy that you're going to be working with both of you so that you can come up with a really good solution. So that considered was quite important to me, because I think you have to consider that. I don't think just putting a weed killer down is something that I would personally do. And in all honesty, sometimes I think mulch just brings its own weeds anyway. So I think going out and considering what you can do for a long-term and a permanent solution is good. So thanks very much. But I'm happy to add that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, do you want to speak to this item? Councillor Parker, do you want to speak to this item as amended? Okay. Yeah, I think you virtually did just then, didn't you? I was sitting here thinking, yeah. Okay, are there any speakers against the substantive as amended? If there are no speakers against, councillors, please cast your vote. And that's passed unanimously. We now go to Community in Place, CP 01-1024, Community Funding Policy. Do I have a mover and seconder for that? Councillor Smith. Do I have a seconder for the community?
Sorry, Mayor, that's a declaration.
Oh, a declaration, okay. Would you like to make your declaration?
Thank you, Mayor. With regard to item CP 01-10/24, I disclose that I previously attended True North Church for a number of years, but have since moved on the last couple of years. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a mover for, or do you have a declaration as well, Councillor? Go ahead, Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I also have, with regard to item CPO 1-1024 Community Funding Policy, I disclose that I am a member of the Wanneroo RSL, and obviously they're receiving from this. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. Are there any other declarations first? Okay, Deputy Mayor Rowe.
Thanks, Mayor. With regard to CPO 1-10/24, I disclose that I am a member of the Girraween Lions Club, who has received some money to be able to deliver the Australia Day breakfast. As a consequence, there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I'll consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And Councillor Berry, do you have a declaration as well?
I do, thank you, Madam Mayor. With regard to item CPO 1-1024, I disclose that I am a member of the Quinns Rocks RSL sub-branch, and as a consequence there may be a perception that my impartiality on the matter may be affected. I declare that I will consider this matter on its merits and vote accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we go, do I have a mover for this item? I'll pick Councillor Miles first and then I'll pick Councillor Parker second. Oh, okay, Councillor Huntley. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this item?
Yeah, just briefly, I think we've already discussed all the beneficiaries of the funding round. Look, it's very important that the City of Wanneroo takes part in these community funding rounds annually and during the year. It is vital that our community does get activity, whether it be from Two Rocks to Condola, to Meridian up to Mindari. It is vital that we keep our community active. It is important that we keep them within their communities and that village atmosphere. And by putting on these small grant requests for some of our voluntary organisations to deal with and to put on, that actually helps towards that a lively community neighbourhood event. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Huntley, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, Madam Mayor, just very quickly, there are obviously 7 receivers of this award. It would be nice if there were a few more in the future. This is a very deserving reward. Although it's a small amount of money, it is really, really good for the community to get out there and see action being taken by our not-for-profits and our community events. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Huntley. Do I have any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to Community Facilities, item CPO 2-1024, Strategic Projects Working Group. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved, Councillor Smith. Seconded, Councillor Figg. Councillor Wright, do you have something to say about this item, and do you have a seconder?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I've woken up now. Yes, I've got Councillor Huntley for this amendment. Thank you, Mayor. Just in regards to this amendment, it's to add points 5 and 6 back, which was part of administration's original recommendation to the briefing session, and then to expand on my original amendment, which was to add on the Neerabup and Quinns group. I understand that there has been a slight change to this, which is on the screen for council members, and it is the last part from some conversations with the administration and council members that sit on the Quinns Rocks Caravan Park group. I believe that they have one last meeting that they need to finalise some minor outstanding items, but this basically just concludes that process by once that last meeting is had, there is no report that needs to be brought to council, it can be closed off automatically. And that enables that group to be able to finalise those outstanding items, and then there can be a new process established if there is any continual need. If that project needs to be reported to the strategic projects group, so be it, or a council forum or any other appropriate mechanism. But basically, just to summarise this amendment, council adopted some guiding principles for the administration on the 16th of July, which included Alkibos Aquatic Recreation Working Group, Neerabup, Quinns and the Wanneroo Rec Centre. And just, I guess, trying to save some time and streamline those processes to enable the administration to, I know at the end of the year we usually get quite heavy agendas, and just to free that up so councillors can focus on what needs to be done coming up to the end of the year. Plus, I also believe that the amendment also aligns with council members' feedback around the closure of these council-led working groups. And just to be clear that this amendment doesn't affect any community-related groups, so there's no community delegates on any of these groups, so they're all purely council-led, and it's basically just transforming the process to the strategic projects working group. So no issue or anything like that will be disadvantaged. It will just be in a new format, being this working group. Yeah, I'm happy to take any not questions on this. Happy to take any debate. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Huntley, would you like to speak to this amendment?
I think that was just all beautifully said. So, no, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Are there any speakers against this item? Councillor Herridge?
Thank you, Mayor. Being this has kind of come across this quickly, I just have a feeling that we are disbanding 4 groups before which is actually also in the report, in the admin comment. Disbanding these groups before we actually put in place the actual strategic projects group, for me, is a risk. The Quinns Rock itself, Caravan Park, it actually doesn't fit into the criteria of the strategic projects working group in the first instance. So I know that we're not really doing much left with them, but it just doesn't, I feel that we're doing one thing and 2 things and it should just be one. So I'd rather establish it, do what we need to do, and then follow suit at the end.
Thank you, Councillor Herridge. Do we have a speaker for the amendment? Okay, we have questions from Deputy Mayor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. They're not questions per se about the amendment, they're questions about the changes that the administration made to the report, because as Councillor Wright has indicated, the report originally proposed to disband 2 of the groups, and he was attempting to add to the list. So can I ask why the administration between last week and this week actually changed those recommendations? So disbanding the Alkibos Aquatic, disbanding the Wanneroo Rec Centre, and it was replaced with notes the strategic projects working group will confirm the projects to be included. So can I ask the administration why it changed the recommendation over the last 7 days?
Ms Davis?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. Absolutely based on the discussion that we did have the opportunity to have through agenda briefing, we did identify that the recommendation probably could have been a lot more sound, and hence why the changes to report document came through to you with those changes.
Thank you. Any other questions, Deputy Mayor Rowe?
Second question of likely 3, Mayor. It says in the administration comment is one of the reasons why it's expressing some concern about the amendment that the Quinns working group have expressed a desire to meet one last time. Is there any explanation as to why that group does intend to meet, given the finalisation of that particular project and the fact that it's shifted from a strategic discussion ultimately into now past the adoption of lease. So I'm struggling to see why that group would need to meet one more time.
Ms Davis?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll actually need to defer that one to the Director of Corporate. Thank you.
Ms Jennings?
Thank you, through the chair. The working group had a couple of things that it was monitoring along the way, and not just this part of the project. So it's really just an opportunity to just check where those particular items are up to and see how they're to be handled in future. We're expecting, now that we have a decision from the West Australian Planning Commission, that we should be able to have a meeting before the end of the year to be able to just check those final things, Mayor.
Thank you. Did you have another question, Deputy Mayor, and then I'll go to Councillor Smith?
Last one, Mayor. Can I get clarification that this working group, once established, will have no delegated authority? So what would be required is when the group does meet and considers what it would like in its jurisdiction and requests other working groups be disbanded, that would ultimately come back to council anyway. So what Councillor Wright is trying to do is simplify that process by doing it now based on what the original motion on notice from yourself, Mayor, suggested months ago.
Ms Davis?
Through the Mayor, that's correct. Item 6.1 in the terms of reference on page 290 does say that the working group has no delegated power or authority in response to the first question. Correct. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith?
I have a question because the administration comment on the amendment, since then Councillor Wright has slightly amended one of the recommendations to incorporate, I guess, some of the comment from administration regarding Queen's Rocks Caravan Park redevelopment having the ability to meet one last time. Can I get an updated comment from admin regarding, does that address their concern in terms of, because, yeah, so I'll go with that question first, thanks.
Ms Davis? Ms Jennings?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, thank you. That will be very helpful to be able to actually do that last meeting just to check those items. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Smith?
So just to clarify, is administration's position now to support the amendment in that sense? Or is there any other problems identified? Thank you.
Ms Davis?
Thank you, Mayor. In response to the response that the Director of Corporate gave around point 7, I believe that is supported.
Just for a point of clarification, I think Councillor Smith wants to know if there are any items in the Alkimos Aquatic Recreation Centre Working Group or the Wanneroo Recreation Centre Working Group or the Neerabup Industrial Area Working Group that need to be addressed to finalise that, if there's any more work to be done in those groups, or if administration supports the closing of those groups. Does there need to be more meetings? I think that's what, is that correct?
Essentially, yes, but also about, because it's about streamlining and if they think that will actually be helpful or not overall.
Yep. Ms Davis?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for the questions. There is a lot of work going on in all of these groups, and hence the reason for the Strategic Projects Working Group and how we've put forward the criteria to not name the project specifically because of the city's quite strong growth profile. So it was trying to continue the works, to keep those works going ahead with very minimal risk to timeframes or timelines in reporting to and from council.
I've got a question. would it be better, see if the 3 of those working groups still have a lot of work to be done on them, they actually need to be incorporated into the strategic projects working group. So disbanding them, I think that's where the confusion is, whether these projects are able to be brought into the strategic projects group or if they should be disbanded before they're brought in. I think that's where the confusion is at the moment. I'm a bit confused as well. So can you please clarify that, Ms Davis?
Thank you, Mayor. So that is the administration's recommendation to council today, is that these working groups that have been suggested to be disbanded are not disbanded at this stage until a point that the new strategic projects working group can be up and running. Noting it will be a new process, so just trying to minimise the risk around those projects. And the terms of reference does incorporate those projects to be accommodated into the new working group when it is established.
Do you have a question, Councillor Herridge? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick one for me. When would we be assuming or seeing the first meeting of this project group? Would that be before the end of the year or when we come back in February?
Ms Davis.
Thank you for that excellent question. The timeframe has not been determined, or the schedule. However, the report does note that at the first meeting, the working group will establish the schedule for the following year.
There were some hands up on this side that I haven't answered yet. Is that? If not, I'll go back to the other side. Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess asked some clarification. My understanding was when we requested the strategic working group set up, I thought we said November was for when it to be established at our November OCM. Can administration clarify that, please?
We'll just take a minute to get the information.
Through the Mayor, the last OCM requested that the Strategic Projects Working Group be brought back to the October OCM meeting with the terms of reference. And I will just take the rest of that on notice for a moment.
So I understand we're establishing it tonight, and then obviously its first meeting should be November.
I don't know if that was in the recommendation.
I think in the original notice of motion it was.
Are we able to find the original notice of motion? Okay. So I'll read out the original motion of notice that was approved. That is, 1, directs administration to plan the establishment of a strategic projects working group having all council members as delegates to have oversight of strategic capital projects. 2, directs administration to consider the following working groups to be integrated into the strategic projects working group. A, Alkimos Aquatic Recreation Centre Working Group. B, Near Above Industrial Area Working Group. C, Queen's Rocks Caravan Park Redevelopment Working Group, and D, Wanneroo Recreation Centre Upgrade Project Working Group. 3, directs administration to draft appropriate terms of reference and to include the plan a proposed set of criteria for identifying a strategic project, and 4, directs administration to prepare a report for council to be presented no later than October 2024 ordinary council meeting for the establishment of the strategic projects working group. And there's nothing else in what council voted on in that.
Mayor
Am I allowed to make a personal clarification, if that's okay?
Yes, you can make a personal
Thank you, Mayor. I believe there was two processes that were going side by side. One of them was Councillor Miles's motion on notice in regards to the Alkimos Master Plan and administration and the Wanneroo Recreation Centre Working Group. There was a plan for a report to be presented to Council, and that was the reason why Council supported the establishment of that group, was to enable, not delay the process, to have that meeting. Now that we're establishing this group, that report that was supposed to go to that separate group is now supposed to come to the Strategic Projects Working Group. So rather than having a separate process with those select councillors on that working group, it now goes to the wider body group. So there should be reports from the administration that is due to be presented before the end of the year, which was supposed to be for the Strategic Projects Group. And that was why Councillor Miles withdrew his motion on notice of creating an Alkimos Master Plan Group as well, because there was some discussion around that item as well. So it all fed into that Strategic Projects Working Group and having a meeting before the end of the year to discuss the Rec Centre and also the Alkimos Master Plan. So that was why we thought November or December before Council goes on break.
Thank you. Councillor Wright. The CEO would like to speak to this. Mr CEO.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. We'd need to just go back and have a look at the history, but I take your word on what's transpired. I think what we're hearing loud and clear from the elected group tonight is there's a sense of urgency around convening the first meeting. So we'll certainly take that on board and work very closely with the appropriate teams to see how quickly we can convene a meeting and maybe provide an update to elected members offline.
Okay. Do we have any speakers against the amendment? Councillor Bedworth has a question.
Yeah, I suppose, excuse me, I suppose some of us on this side of the room are just a bit unsure as to the urgency with which we need to disband these groups. Can that be explained why the disbandment can't occur at a later time?
Ms Davis?
Through you, Mayor, I'm the administration's not putting forward the recommendation to disband those groups at this stage.
Okay. Councillor Smith?
Can I speak against the amendment, Mayor?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. So whilst I understand and I commend Councillor Wright, I think for the intention and purpose to streamline and reduce reports that he feels that if it's possible to reduce, at this stage I am going to actually listen to administration's point of view a bit more on this one in terms of operationally and in terms of what they think, and so if they don't think it's going to streamline or if they think it's has a bit more risk to it, I'm happy to support what the main substantive is and go with that, and so therefore not support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Do I have a speaker for the amendment? Okay, we'll do the question and then we'll go to you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Miles?
Yeah, thank you. Just a question, request from administration. Of those groups that are listed in the amendment, Alkimos Aquatic, Wanneroo Rec, Neerabup Industrial or Quinns Rocks, when is the proposed next meeting for any one of those groups?
Mr CEO?
I didn't know you had access to my mobile phone, which has been buzzing, Councillor Miles. I don't know whether I'm concerned or not, but there is a bit of a conversation happening amongst a few people at the moment, and I'm led to believe that the first meeting of the Wanneroo Rec Centre was actually scheduled for the 4th of November, so there is the potential to have this first meeting at that time.
Okay, do you want to speak for this item, Deputy Mayor?
I do, Mayor. I asked some questions before and now I feel satisfied with the contents of the amendment. I was going to originally suggest requesting a recommendation to ask administration to schedule it in November, but I think the CEO has indicated the sense of understanding where Council's at. Really, all is at stake here is that Councillor Wright is intending to disband these groups in consideration of what the initial motion on notice from yourself was, Mayor. The work on the projects is ongoing. The projects are not being stopped as a result of this amendment. They will simply be, the work will continue on an operational basis, and when this group is established and it determines what its jurisdiction is, the groups themselves and the contents of them would be amalgamated within the Strategic Projects Working Group, subject to that group's consideration. I think if I was to summarise this amendment in one word, I would say efficiency. And that is what it is trying to do. It is trying to be efficient and to streamline this process. It might save us a couple of months in terms of the disbanding, but I think the group for quite some time has indicated that this is the direction we're wanting to move in. We've been talking about the volume of reports that we deal with on a regular basis and the fact that the number of working groups has proliferated out to require a significant amount of meeting time on council. To the best of my knowledge, that has been the consensus of the group for some time, so I'm fully in support of the councillor's amendment.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Do I have a speaker against? Councillor Bedworth.
Thank you, Mayor. In consideration of everything Deputy Mayor Rowe and Councillor Wright has said, I'm going to go with Councillor Smith on this. I support the intent of everyone who's spoken, that we want to streamline things, that we want to bring everything under one umbrella. I respect and understand that, and I agree with it. However, everywhere I've ever worked and everything I've ever seen in most of my life require a period of handover. And I just think, on this occasion, I think with these groups, where there's no harm, there's nothing lost by keeping them going until such a time that we're satisfied that the Strategic Projects Working Group is up and running, and then can make the recommendation to Council to then disband them at a time in the future. So based on that, I will not be supporting the amendment, I'm afraid.
Thank you, Councillor Bedworth. Do I have any speakers for the amendment? If there are no speakers for the amendment, Councillor Wright, would you like the right of reply?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mayor. Just highlighting some of the debate that has occurred, I just want to emphasise a couple of points. One of them being these items that we obviously adopted some guiding principle on, there is actually no current mechanism for any of these items to go anywhere else. Council's been quite clear in what it wants in forums. Council's been quite clear what it wants in committees. Council has been quite clear in what it wants. There is no other mechanism other than the Strategic Projects Working Group, if that's what Council wants to continue receiving updates on. I just want to highlight the other point. The reason for forming the Strategic Projects Working Group, and one of the principles, was around an inclusive approach. We need to stop doing these segmented working groups with select few councillors. It's important that if we're spending the amount of money and to avoid situations of large capital project expenditure in past projects that have led to a lot of division on this council, it's important that everyone is around at the planning stage so we can establish those principles properly. And particularly as the CEO highlighted in regards to the Wanneroo Rec Centre being presented next month, I would like everyone around this table to be there for those presentations. So when it does come to council deciding, we all are on the same page receiving the same information instead of 6 councillors. You know, particularly the local ward councillors that have been following the project very closely anyway, and I think it's the rest of council that needs to be brought along that journey. I just want to highlight the point that Councillor Bedworth brought up around handover. There is no finishing of these groups. They're just being transferred to a whole council approach. Council will still be dealing with the same items, the same action items as a whole group rather than a segmented approach. So there is no change. I can understand the Quins group is slightly different because that project is concluded, but there is no need for a handover because these items and these projects are still ongoing, and that was the whole approach to having a coordinated approach for large strategic capital projects. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. So we are now going to vote on the amendment, and I understand the amendment is we do not have item 7 on the end of the amendment. That has been taken off. That's the Quins Rocks Caravan Park redo.
Sorry, Bear, it's amended on the screen. So it's basically the same as what's on the printed paper, with the last words being subject to the group having their last meeting to finalise and close those outstanding items.
I didn't see that. So as item 7 is up there. So therefore, councillors, we are moving the amendment, either supporting it or not supporting it. And our councillors, I asked you to cast your vote now. We're missing one councillor. Councillor Smith. Okay, that amendment is passed with 8 councillors supporting it, 4 councillors not supporting it. The councillors not supporting it is myself, Councillor Herridge, Councillor Bedworth and Councillor Figg. Councillors supporting Councillor Huntley, Councillor Moore, Councillor Parker, Councillor Rowe, Councillor Wright, Councillor Miles, Councillor Berry and Councillor Smith. We now go to the substantive as amended. Councillor Smith, would you like to speak to the substantive as amended?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Glad that we're having progress on this, and I think there's lots of appetite for the group and to get it up and running. So fantastic, and thanks for the administration to work to that time schedule for this October. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Figg, would you like to speak to the substantive as amended?
Thank you, Mayor. I think, as Councillor Smith has said, this project working group, the strategic project working group, is going to be very valuable to councillors in a few ways, mostly, as Councillor Wright has referred to, with efficiency. I do hold some level of trepidation about when the first meeting is held, because I think that has a great impact on the Alkimos Aquatic Centre delivery timeframe specifically. But in saying that, given the indication from our CEO, I am comfortable with it and I'm looking forward to the first meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any speakers against this item as amended? If there are no speakers against, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to CP 03-1024, response to PT 02-824, request for floodlighting upgrades at Grandis Park. Do I have a mover and seconder for the substantive? Moved Councillor Wright, seconder. Councillor Huntley. Is there anything else relating to this item?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a proposed amendment.
Do you have a seconder?
Yes, Councillor Miles.
Councillor Moore, would you like to speak to your amendment, please?
Thank you so much, Madam Mayor. Yes, so with this one, what the intended amendment would be is bringing it forward a year. We felt that 2 years is too long. So what it ultimately is doing is bringing the design forward to happen within the next 6 months of next year, so 2025, and the works to be completed before the 2026 season. So therefore, the club has the full winter season of 2026 to start. They are currently fully booked for the entire season, and so being able to play games at night time would make a significant impact and really would benefit the club. Not only that, in our area as well, we have a lot of mischievous behaviour. So by having this area activated at night time, we are going to have many more eyes there, and it will discourage bad behaviour happening at the skate park at night time and around the area. As well as that, it will also encourage more families to get involved and more youth to get involved, so they're not hanging around the shopping centre at night time and being more of a disturbance. So I ask my fellow councillors to support the moving up of this by a year, so we're able to help assist the club. Thank you.
Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I obviously support my fellow ward councillor, Councillor Moore, in all that she has said. We actually had a site visit with one of the managers from the club, Shamrock Club, last year, just after Councillor Moore was elected on, with the then acting director of Community in Place, Mr Clem, and his team, because we were talking at that stage about upgrading the lighting for the local skate park, which is on the same sort of area as this, when we then moved on to talk about how Granders Park needed their lighting upgraded from the 50 lux that's currently there. So it is something there. And obviously, as part of and if everybody got their replacement pages from administration on 292, I am looking forward to actually upgrading it to 200 lux when they get to the National Premier League. Mr Burke, you should be striving towards that. But I do have a question and totally support the recommendations. I do have a question to administration with regard to the lux capacity, because it does come up from time to time. So I'm not sure who will answer it, Mayor, but my question is, when administration upgrades lighting from 50 to 100 or whatever it is, at what point on the ground are they achieving the 100 lux?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. If I understand the question correctly, a standard of 100 lux or 200 lux or whatever the standard is being measured is calculated by an average of readings taken on a 5 metre grid pattern across the playing surface. So it's not a single point on a particular playing surface, it's an average of readings across a grid pattern of that particular playing field.
Thank you. Do you have another question, Councillor?
Yeah, just to supplement that, thank you, Mayor. That being the case, does administration then, when it does its design pattern for the lighting, does it look at obviously what the facility, what the oval in this case is being used for, bearing in mind you can have soccer, hockey, you can have footy and all sorts. So how do they determine what the lighting capacity is for that particular field, bearing in mind that most of our ovals are multi-use?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, so a consultant is provided a brief on what we require them to do, and it is based on a multi-use approach to meet a certain Australian standard for floodlighting. Where we have sporting field layouts such as soccer pitches and that kind of thing, they are provided so that the consultant and the designer are able to come up with a design that optimises the floodlighting for that particular sport based on the dimensions and the locations of the playing spaces.
Thank you, Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all I have to say and ask.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers against the amendment? You have a question, Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Mayor. In the advice from administration, there's a comment about shortening the project delivery timeframe would also impact the city's ability to attract external funding. That statement's pretty broad at this point, and it's pretty pivotal, I guess, to my decision making. So can I get clarity in terms of the impact? Is that stating based on known timeframes for grants opening and things like that, if that means that the city would not be able to apply, or it would put more pressure in terms of the shortening the deadline for which they could put an application in? Ultimately, I'm looking at, does this mean that there would be significant greater cost if we weren't to get that funding? Thank you.
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. So what that statement relates to is each year the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries have a Club Nightlights funding program, and that is open. The application period for that is September each year. So the way this timing would work if we were to bring the project forward is that this project wouldn't be able to apply for that funding, because there is then a lag period while the department makes their decision on that funding application, and that would push this into the following financial year before we had a decision, and we wouldn't be able to start the project. Now, having said that, there is no guarantees that when we put an application in that we do get funding, and we hadn't, I guess, forecast that far forward yet to decide which particular floodlighting project we were submitting funding applications in for. But the comment is meant to advise that if we do bring this project forward 12 months, then that opportunity to apply for that Club Night Lights funding program is not going to be possible.
Thank you. You have another question, Councillor Smith?
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Really important. The second part of that question is if it was kept to the 2-year period so we could apply, what amount of money would we be expected to potentially get back? And the second part to that question is, what has our past history been in terms of success rate for community lights funding grants? Thank you.
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. 1/3 funding, so 1/3 of the project cost of the eligible components of project cost, so which would be the majority of in this case, so 1/3 of that $230,000. We have generally had success with our applications for the Club Night Lights program.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I did have one question in regards to using recycled lighting. I understand we updated the ones in the Kingsway regional facility to upgrade those to a competition standard. Do we have any repurposed or recycled 100 lux lighting that we could utilise, that, or do we throw them out after we upgrade them? Because I thought we had set the standardisation of poles and stuff that we use for these projects. So is there an opportunity for using any recycled 100 lux lighting?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We did try for a project last year. It didn't eventuate the way we wanted. The reason for that is that's the age and condition of the poles and the light fittings and the transport costs involved from a site, storage cost, transport, and then transporting to new site. So it wasn't economical to actually reuse that. We had that option in one of the projects, which we didn't exercise in the end.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Smith, and then Councillor Parker, then Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. Could administration comment about, so if it's about $80,000 that we have to factor in as extra cost, maybe in terms of our long-term financial plan, if that impacts on any other projects, or if it's because it's around $80,000 that could potentially be found in some savings from other projects. So I'm looking for the impact, potential impact here. Thanks.
Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. At this point, and I answered this question last week actually, I haven't got sight of any savings at this point. It would be mid-year review before I'd know that.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor. So could I ask how many applications for floodlighting would we make per year? So would it just be one application, or would that application cover 3 or 4 or 5 upgrades?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks, Councillor Parker. I believe we are eligible to submit more than one application, but we are required to prioritise our applications when we submit them. But I may have to also take that on notice and just clarify those circumstances around number of projects we are able to submit for.
Do you have another question, Councillor Parker?
I do, thank you. How many clubs are awaiting an upgrade to that 100 lux?
Mr Clem.
Thanks, Mayor. Sorry, I don't have that level of detail available to me at the moment. Certainly the intent was to present some information on our floodlighting position through our next discussions on the long-term financial plan.
Okay, I will go Councillor Herridge next, Deputy Mayor Rowe, and then Councillor Bedworth. Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a couple of questions. They've kind of similar been answered, but I'm going to go for it anyway because we may get a different answer. Can you tell me if we do this project and we do move it forward, because I believe it's already in the long-term plan, the petition has come through to move it forward. Does that put any pressure on any other lighting projects or any other projects that are within the first 3 years?
Mr Clem.
Thanks, Mayor. I think the quantum of floodlighting projects that we deliver will be a discussion and resolved through the long-term financial planning process. Director Singh might have some comments on, I guess, the ability for administration to resource projects, and in terms of if we're doing more floodlighting projects in each year or in each period, whether we have adequate resources to take on more than what we currently do.
Mr Singh.
Thank you, Mayor. I think we on average do depend maybe 1 or 2 projects, floodlight projects every year. So that's the general average historically. And that's probably will be in this year's program as well. If we're going to add more projects, as admin comments do say, we have to look at the program and see which other projects will get impacted.
Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. This is probably a 2-part question. To get to that point, do we wait for the clubs to come to us, or do we do a feasibility study, or where do we actually go to? If we do have the clubs that are coming to us, will this set a precedent? And we must be also discussing this with a significant amount of clubs.
Mr Clem.
The approach to floodlights is in terms of existing floodlights that might need upgrading or renewal, is an asset renewal approach. We have sites that don't have adequate floodlighting, so if a need is identified, then we would add them to our program to install compliant floodlighting at those particular venues. And we have a priority matrix which we do use to try and determine a priority order for floodlighting installations.
Have you finished with your questions, Councillor Herridge? Deputy Mayor Rowe.
I think I forgot 2 of them, so I can only remember 1 now. That's how long it's been. Mayor, I think my main question, through yourself, as it has already been indicated, this was, I believe, set for construction or projected for construction in the 26-27 financial year, and the request is to bring the design forward 1 year and then the construction works forward 1 year as well. My question is, does that mean that the $235,000 is being brought forward to the year in the long-term financial plan that already has a significant surplus of capital works projects with, as of yet, money not knowing where it's coming from to be able to fund them?
Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. Certainly there is no money in the future unless we raise rates. So the money, unless it's from reserve funding, which I don't think it is in this case, if it's municipal, it doesn't exist at the moment. So as in it's not in a future year, it doesn't exist. Only this year's municipal funds exist. And next year, the current list that we have to look at for 25-26 is more than we can afford, so we're actually working on that at the moment to try and bring it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Rowe, you have another question?
I have remembered my second question, Mayor, which was, does the administration know first if this particular project had ever been included in our advocacy agenda? And then the second part of that question is, does the administration know if the club had made any representations to either the State Member of Parliament or the Federal?
Mr CEO.
Thank you for the question, Deputy Mayor. Through the Mayor, I'm certainly not aware in this round of there being this particular project that's been identified as part of the city's advocacy efforts, and there's certainly been no discussions, Mayor, that we've had on this particular project. Prior years, I'm unable to answer, but I'm sort of getting some looks from around the room where directors have been here for a while to suggest that it perhaps hasn't been a priority project that we've advocated for previously.
Thank you. Councillor Bedworth next, and then Councillor Miles. Councillor Bedworth, you have a question?
Thank you. Just one very quick question. Am I correct in thinking that if this project was moved forward, that would then allow another project to potentially receive funding from the grants system?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I guess potentially if we weren't putting an application in for the Club Night Lights program for this particular project next year, then we certainly would be for another project.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. My first question is actually to administration. Through the night lights funding, we've already done that for this year. So have we received any replies in regard to that into the September round this year?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. We didn't submit an application for Club Night Lights this year. We didn't have a project from a timing point of view that lined up with the funding.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you. Just also, I guess, for administration obviously this is already, as Deputy Mayor Rowe has indicated, it's already in the long-term financial plan, which was put in there by myself and Councillor Moore. Bringing it forward really only equates to about 9 or 10 months, so it's not a full year cycle. The only thing that is requested a lot sooner is the $10,000 administration are requiring to do the design of the 100 lux floodlighting for the park itself. Is that correct?
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, that's correct. So through the proposed amendment, it would be a case of having $10,000 allocated through this year's mid-year review process to undertake that detailed design component in the current financial year. And then the amount of money assigned for the construction of the project would also be brought forward 12 months.
Thank you. Councillor Miles, do you have a question?
Yeah, just finally, thank you, Mayor. Bearing in mind that we didn't apply for any funding this year for any lights, which does amaze me, this obviously will be on next year's September round of grant funding, so that would be, we would put it on next year's night lights funding round. Would that be correct?
Mr Clem.
If the timing stays as currently proposed, where design is done in 25-26 and then construction 26-27, then yes, we could submit an application to the Club Night Lights funding program next year.
Do you have another question?
Yeah, just to follow up on that one. If the design is done this year and we obviously wish to have these lights installed in the 26 year, I'm getting confused here, you would still be able to apply for funding in the night lights round because obviously that would be next September 25.
Mr Clem.
Thank you, Mayor. No, so the application we would submit next year would be for projects to be delivered in the 26-27 financial year.
Deputy Mayor Rowe, you had a question?
Oh yes, that was it. Thank you, Councillor Herridge. Mayor, with your indulgence, I'd ask for permission for the recommendations to be split and to vote separately on 2 and 3.
Are the mover and seconder accepting of having the items 2 and 3 split? Is that what you're saying, Deputy Mayor Rowe? That would be 1, 2 together and then 3 separate. So the mover and seconder, are you happy to separate the two amendment
If I could raise
votes?
a point of order, Mayor. Under section 5.32, the presiding person If you agree that it's a complicated motion, can be 2 or more recommendations without the need for approval, if that helps.
It might be the case, but if the mover and seconder aren't happy with it, I'm not going to do it. Are the mover and seconder happy with splitting the recommendation? So the recommendation is 1 and 2, and then the so the amendments 2 and 3 are separate. Yeah. So we're splitting item 2 and item 3, which are the amendments on the amendment. Councillor Miles?
I understand this is an amendment to the substantive, but if we split 2 and 3, we would be taking the original 2 out of the substantive, so therefore there would be no long-term financial plan for construction. Would that be correct?
Yes, that would be taking item 2 out, which would remove the long-term financial plan. So if we vote against the item 3, then that would be taken out as well. I, as the presiding member, I'm going to move that the amendment be considered together instead of separating it. Okay, that is my ruling. Are there any, do you have another question, Councillor Smith?
Just a quick process question, I guess, for the long-term financial plan. Is the full amount of, say, 235 or the full amount put into the budget, even though you might hope to get a grant? And I guess the second part is, if you assume, even if you put the full amount in, there might be the assumption that you get some grants across many different applications, and you have another project in waiting if you get those grants. So I'm still looking at the impact. So is the full amount put in there already budgeted, but also is there a project in the wings, if that makes sense?
Ms Jennings?
Yes, so in the long-term financial plan, that's what number 2 is saying. That's what's listed in the long-term financial plan at the moment.
I have a question. Mr CEO, can we add this to our advocacy program while we're busy advocating at the moment, and so that we can take advantage of the next 2 elections coming up, even though it hasn't been what we've distributed so far? Can we add it to it and put that in as well?
Thank you, Mayor. So Council has already adopted an advocacy program, and that was done a number of months ago, and those advocacy efforts are very clear. There are a number of projects contained within the city's capital works program this year that we circulate to, I guess, prospective candidates or existing city members, that they can, if they've got, I guess, lower levels of funding available, that they can choose those projects. If there was a positive council resolution on this particular issue, I can't see why we couldn't add it to the conversations that we have with the people that we meet with.
Can we add an item to the amendment if the amenders are agreeable that we add this item to our advocacy program as well for the elections in 2025, the state and federal elections? Would you be agreeable with that, have that as item 4, and then item 4 become 5, request administration to contact the lead petitioner? Are you agreeable with that? Do you agree with that?
Yep, more than happy with that.
Okay. Are you happy, Councillor Miles, with that? Are you happy with that recommendation, Councillor Miles?
I'm happy with the extra item on whatever it's going to come up as, yes.
It's about advocacy, so that it includes it in that current advocacy
I guess,
program.
Mayor, I think it's something that Deputy Mayor Rowe has articulated on more than 5 occasions that I'm aware of, that there really shouldn't be anything that's not on our advocacy program. It's almost like we should have an open list and say, please pick a project and take it off our budget.
Make it this project to the advocacy, this project. Do you have a question, Deputy Mayor?
Yes, Mayor, it's more of a statement, but for convenience, I'll word it as a question to stay within the rules. I think, and Councillor Miles is right, and I thank him for that comment because they have raised it multiple times. And the context that I want to add to that is at the moment we have 5 state seats within the jurisdiction, all with margins over 20%. They're not marginal seats at present. And I think the context that I'd like the administration to take on board is that if a seat is not regarded as marginal by major political parties, it is unlikely to attract millions and millions of dollars in funding. So in terms of the big items that we include on our advocacy plans, however much merit they may have, it's unlikely that those candidates can secure the sizable contributions that we need to deliver said projects. So I suppose my question is, can the administration continue to review the plan to ensure that as candidates and members brief the administration and the Mayor on what their capacity is to support projects, that we come up with projects and items that they will be able to support to ensure that we maximise the amount that we fund from other sources?
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Deputy Mayor, which we do. So the Economic Development Team, as I said, takes guidance from Council, not only through your adopted advocacy program, but also your adoption of the budget in terms of the projects that you have supported through that process. So we're not acting beyond your authority. So I can assure you that the Economic Development Team currently does that.
Okay, so we have the amendment.
Mayor, can I just ask, bearing in mind what the Deputy Mayor has articulated to the administration very well, is it possible then maybe that item 4 could maybe just take away the word this and just put maybe projects to add all projects like we were just talking about? Would that make it easier for CEO?
Mr CEO.
I guess, as I just stated, Councillor Miles, I guess we take guidance from the elected group. So you adopt your advocacy program, which, as the Deputy Mayor mentioned, is the larger ticket items. And then you also adopt your annual budget. And I think outside of that process, the administration would be acting with far too much discretion. So I think that we have adequate guidance at the moment. So I think specifically mentioning this project, because it's not in the budget at this point in time, adds the direction we need.
Councillor Smith, you have a question.
The question is, so for recommendation 4, requests about advocacy, I know we had a question before about splitting 2 and 3, and that doesn't quite make sense. For me, could we split 4 out as advocacy, because I'm very happy with that one, but also potentially adding to that, so I would be happy if we were able to get money outside through an advocacy program to then reconsider bringing this forward. So could we extend that recommendation as well about this particular project? Because I'm concerned about that shortfall.
Councillor Smith, I was working out some standing order stuff. Can you repeat what you want to do with this again? Sorry.
So two requests. Number 1 is to split recommendation 4, so we can vote on that separately. And then there was a second part.
have we spent on it? I understand what you're saying about separating it, but if we don't... I think leave it as is. I think we'll just leave it as it is rather than two separate. I understand what you're saying. Deputy Rowe, did you have another question? You did. You had your hand up. He can't remember what it is. So do I have any speakers against this amendment?
I do have the question, Mayor. Through yourself, we adopt as a council, or at least release publicly, several years' worth of our draft capital works program, and the long-term financial plan, once adopted, is made public. Is that correct?
Mr CEO.
The long-term financial plan is a public document, but I'd probably defer to both the Director of Assets and Director of Corporate Strategy in terms of whether the Ford Capital Works plan is published in any detail.
Mr Singh or Ms Jennings? Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll go first. The information that we have in our corporate business plan is probably the most number of years that is visible. The figures in the long-term financial plan are very visible, but the actual projects aren't visible in that particular plan.
Mr Singh, do you have a response, or are you happy with Ms Jennings' response?
Thank you, Mayor. I think Ms Jennings has covered the response.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Rowe.
My only addition to that, and it builds on what Councillor Miles has said, if the long-term financial plan is public and we have some information released about our forward capital projections, there'd be nothing stopping the CEO and the Mayor from, when they have their meetings with candidates of major political parties, to not only take in the advocacy program, but the other documents that talks about 1, 2, 3, 4 years into the future. So if the Member of Parliament or the candidate identifies something in year 2 or 3 that they think is has merit and should be funded, they would have the opportunity to support that. Is that correct?
Mr CEO.
That is correct, Deputy Mayor. We could take some guidance from that, but it's also really, really important to consider that we don't go in with a scattergun approach as well. It is always quite targeted, and I guess you just don't want to roll out all of these projects and I guess dilute the advocacy effort. So there is, although there is a number of projects that we could propose, we do try to make sure that that's targeted as well, taking into consideration the marginality of the seats and also all the other suggestions that you've made tonight.
Thank you. Any speakers against this amendment? Councillor Smith.
So whilst I admire the intent of this, for me, the sticking point is the shortfall that comes from not being able to apply for the grant. Especially looking ahead in capital works and a long-term financial plan and what we've got to deliver, and maybe not having all the money of what we want to deliver everything. That shortfall, I want them to have the lights as soon as possible, but there are a lot of wants out there. And so for me, I can't just throw away possible money that we could be getting from external sources. Thank you.
Do I have a speaker for? If there are no speakers for, I'm going to speak for it. I went and visited the Shamrock Football Club and I saw the numbers of players there. I saw that they ran all the ovals and everything that was happening non-stop, and that with the growth in Banksia Grove and the growth in that area around there, there is an exponential growth to the Shamrocks Club. And they're doing a fantastic job for the community. They have asked for these lights and asked for a lot of stuff for a long time. I met with them, I think it was before Christmas with the season. I came down and met with you and we went through some stuff. And I'm very happy to bring this project forward, looking at what's happening with the community, looking with the quantity of members in that club and the constant growth that they're having at the moment and the success they're having as a club as well. So I'm very happy to support this amendment. Do I have any speakers against the amendment? If there are no, are you speaking against Councillor Parker?
Really too sure. There was just something that I was trying to think of a little while ago, and the one thing we couldn't do. If we added request administration to attempt to identify 235,000 in the long-term financial plan, 25-26 for construction. So if, for example, something came up, something arose, and we could get the 235, would that be a possibility? So not adding it, but attempt to identify. So while we're going through the mid-year budget and things like that, is there a way that we could attempt to identify that kind of money? Would that be possible?
Mover and seconder, are you happy with that? Okay. Do I have a speaker against the amendment? Councillor Figg first.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to echo what Councillor Smith said and say that the intent behind this sort of upgrade is excellent. I think the fact that it is already scheduled is fantastic as well. I can understand the clubs want for it to be brought forward, absolutely. I've seen the clubs up in our area, in our North Ward, which have similar issues in already new areas where they've been built for the population that is predicted for the area, and they still struggle to fill out space. In saying that, I believe that this process is, I don't want to be, it's shambolic. I'm really not a fan of how this has come about. I think the proposed amendment itself has some merit to it, particularly the request for $10,000 for design, and I would be tempted to vote for that particular aspect on its own. But given the uncertainty around including an additional $235K in the long-term financial plan a year earlier, along with the lack of external funding, I think it probably means that this is a bit too difficult for me to vote for. But I want to repeat that I respect the amendment itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, you want to speak for the amendment? Thank
Yes,
you.
please. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to, I guess, touch on a few points. One being, obviously, this process, and I take Councillor Figg's point around the way it's come, but the only reason why it's come this way is because part of our process, we have to close that petition that's come before us, and that timing is not in the control of elected members. It comes from the members of public at their request, and we have to formalise and make a decision on that petition. So I take the point that it's not nice to talk about these things out in public, so we can get a better understanding from the administration and understanding the financial implications of that. But I do also take the point that, as been highlighted in previous reports, the public open space policy and our sports floodlighting policy don't match at the moment, and that's why we're having these issues, because they're so out of whack. And I think it really highlights that these, not so much the floodlighting one, because we've already obviously done a review on that, but the public open space. So when we do build these open spaces, we are preparing these sorts of things from day one, depending on what groups we know are going to be operating there. We know that sports, especially at the junior level, as highlighted by Ms Casey just before, is still quite strong in the corridor. And in particular, within Bankshire Grove, we don't have many facilities as it is within the Central and Central East wards other than the showgrounds. And I think to have the opportunity where we have alternative sporting grounds that can cater and facilitate for sports, if the Wanneroo Showgrounds has an issue, we've actually got backup sites that we can put groups, and worst comes to worst, we can actually split the ovals and have 2 sports operating on them, or whatever the case is. So it actually creates a safety net. I know this item focuses on the Shamrock group, but it does also create a plan within the central wards where if that facility does go down, the closest ones that we send people is Kingsway or up north. There are no alternative facilities, and Edward Griffiths Park is already at capacity for football, and there are no other time slots. So I do take the point, but I think it's really critical. I personally, don't know why we're arguing over $245,000 when we can look at, as Director Jennings said, we can consider it during the mid-year budget review if there is savings. You know, and at the end of the day, council does have that decision on the draft long-term financial plan where we can, before adoption at council, take things out or put things in. So I wouldn't say it's a decision that locks in, but it is a good indication to give the club some certainty that there is appetite to either bring it forward or push it back, whatever the case is. But as Mayor Aitken also outlined just before, it is a strong club. There aren't many clubs within this area that have that growth. And particularly in the football space, we do have a lot of AFL and not so much within that football space. So I think it is a timely upgrade that is needed. And I do take the points from other councillors around the room that there are other projects that are also worth upgrading these. So I was quite disheartened hearing administration's view that there was no project submitted this year, considering that we actually have so many backlog of projects, and I don't know why we wouldn't be putting 3 or 4 up every year just for the sake of it, just so we can get some guaranteed funding, and that should be across the board for traffic treatments, for project upgrades, floodlighting. I think any offset of our budget is a positive for ratepayers and a positive for this council. So I urge council to support, and it doesn't stop us from going through that advocacy program and securing any additional funding, because at the end of the day, as councillors have articulated, this is already in the long-term financial plan, and whether that particular project is coming out of reserves or municipal funding, as we adopted in our last budget, a lot of our capital works program is actually from reserves for this year, so not so much from municipal funding. So just urge councillors to take those onto consideration, and that allows us to give a bit more time for council to come up with a strategy as part of our long-term financial plan workshop coming up to be able to look at it a bit more of a holistic view. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Wright. I actually have a question of Ms Jennings. We're talking about this being in the long-term financial plan, but if it's planned to be in 25-26, is it not actually in our 4-year corporate business plan?
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think a one of this size would be in the corporate business plan. It's generally the larger ones under those services. So at the moment, it would only be in the long-term financial plan. However, being for 25-26, it will come up in our budget discussions next year.
That we're having imminently as well. Okay. Deputy Mayor Rowe, did you want to speak? Do I have any speakers against? Councillor Herridge.
Thank you, Mayor. I can completely appreciate and thank our petitioners for coming and doing what they've done, and our ward councillors, and I think it's actually quite considerate of all of us to actually take the time to actually debate this item. This isn't something that's a one-off. This will be something that is across our district. I have this conversation with a number of my sporting clubs, and I'm in constant contact with them all the time. Mr Clem knows Kingsway Footy Club very well. It's difficult for me to put one in front of the other. So for me, I would prefer to actually have this done at long-term financial plan rather than us putting it in there and saying this must be done. Putting something else in front of another kind of doesn't sit right with me per se. The other thing was for the design, which Councillor Figg did actually mention, the 10K, to split that out, I would have been supportive of doing that 10K and then doing the mid-year review to see, as Councillor Parker indicated, where the 235 would come from. It's not a lot of money, but to some it is. I would prefer to actually do this through our long-term financial plan rather than having it sitting here in chambers. So unfortunately, I won't support.
Any speakers for this item? Councillor Bedworth.
Thank you, Anne. And just to reiterate what Councillor Herridge said, good debate. I think what we need to keep sight of in this whole thing is a local community sport club which is growing exponentially. I too have seen them. And I caveat this being a rugby fan. So you're getting some support from a rugby fan here. Now, what we've got to remember is that this club is, in the darkened hours, is struggling. They're struggling to cover the field space. And more importantly, they have an all abilities section, which I assume will include people who may be vision impaired, running around in subpar lighting conditions. Now, for me, bringing this forward, whilst I respect and understand the other councillors' trepidations, it will make space for another project to take its spot. It will make space for administration to apply for grants for those other projects in terms of floodlighting. So to do this now would benefit not only the Shamrock Rovers, but the local Banksia Grove community and other communities that need floodlight upgrades, because it will then allow us to allocate grant funding to those other projects that are further down the track and bring them forward also, potentially. So I urge everyone, please, support this community group for what they need, for the growth they've got, and not just the growth they've got in the junior section, but the senior section, where, as you've heard before, as Councillor Wright pointed out, that participation levels drop off at senior level. Well, this is the opposite with this club. They deserve our support. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a speaker against? If there are no more speakers against, Councillor Moore, would you like the right of reply?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Only really to thank the fellow councillors that we've had a really healthy debate about this. But I'm speaking for this. I think as much everything has been already said tonight, but I just hope that this does go through, and I ask for the support, and thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, could you please cast your vote for the amendment? Thank you. And the amendment is carried 7-4, 5 against. Councillors against were Deputy Mayor Rowe, Councillor Herridge, Councillor Berry, Councillor Smith and Councillor Figg. The councillors supportive were myself, Councillor Huntley, Councillor Moore, Councillor Bedworth, Councillor Parker, Councillor Miles and Councillor Wright. We now go to the substantive as amended. Councillor Wright, do you want to speak to this item as amended?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mayor. Just to, I guess, summarise, and Councillor Bedworth brought up a really good point, and it did slip my mind from the briefing session. I know Mr Clem talked about the city having a matrix, and I guess that was going to be my point in regards to that special abilities program, and if that does cause a risk of not having adequate lighting if someone does injure themselves on city assets. So that obviously, and I take Councillor Herridge's point of view, that was difficult to put one club over another, but if there is a different circumstance or that specific thing that does get triggered, and this being that there may be a risk to those children that have those impairments, to be able to adequately participate within the community sports. But as the project has now, as the amendment has now succeeded, overall, I just want to thank the Carramar Shamrock Rovers Football Club for obviously tabling this with us. I know that you guys have been a great support to the City of Wanneroo in participating in all of our programs, and I know you keep in regular touch with the administration and outlining your forward plans for the club, so we do appreciate that and thank you for that. And also the contribution you do to the local community. And as Mayor Aitken and Councillor Moore and Councillor Bedworth and the various voices around the room have already articulated, it is a strong growth club. And I think that's really important to keep in mind, that we don't have many clubs within the local area up this way. So I think it is important that we do make sure we do have strong clubs spread throughout the city and not focused either on the north or the south or central. It's important that we do have that geographical spread of thriving communities and ensuring that we equally spread investment throughout the city. So I do thank the Shamrock Rovers Football Club for being able to put this petition to us, and I do know your members will probably be eagerly awaiting the council result tonight, so I'll finish my speech there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Huntley, would you like to speak to this as a seconder?
Just very quickly, well done. Hopefully this will go through, and it's great to see Grandis Park get its lights finally. Thank you.
Okay, any speakers against the substantive as amended? If there are no speakers against the substantive as amended, councillors, please cast your vote. I'm missing one. Oh, got them. It was passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We now go to, yes, Councillor Huntley's got to leave at this time, so we excuse you. And so as Councillor Moore has to leave as well. Yep. So we now go to CPO 41024, a response to PTO 2424, illegal off-road activities in Two Rocks. Do we have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved Councillor Miles. Who is the seconder? Councillor Figg. Councillor Miles, do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, just briefly, Mayor. Last week was a very good discussion again in the briefing session. I do want to thank Director Davies and her team for amending the recommendation to take into consideration all that was said by Council, and obviously those changes reflect in the report tonight. Councillor Coetzee, who is travelling by bike, well, she says, but I think it's a very luxurious caravan, in South Australia at the moment, is very keen, obviously, to pass on her support and ask Council to support this pretty much long overdue sort of restricted access movements to the four-wheel drive. I had a very good talk with Director Davies today on possible solutions within some of the four-wheel drive social media pages, and I think administration are going to tackle that as well, just to let people know that this is no longer a four-wheel drive track as endorsed by previous council. With that, I ask Council to support the recommendations that administration have put up, and can't wait to see some of them put in place. Thank you.
Councillor Miles. Councillor Figg, would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. First of all, I'd like to pass on my deep thanks to Councillor Miles for assisting my fellow ward councillor, Coetzee, in ensuring that this was dealt with properly and helping to discuss it with admin in forming the final recommendation. So thank you for that. I also want to thank my fellow ward councillor, Coetzee, who, as Councillor Miles said, is away at the moment, for taking the helm on this one. I've only been on council for coming on a year now, but this issue I know has been on my desk for about 7 years, and to have it finally come to some form of action is just an excellent result, albeit somewhat a bit late. So thank you to the Director for taking this tack. I really appreciate it, and I hope that my fellow councillors approve of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. And we're down to 10 and we're passed unanimously. We now go to CP 05-1024, renaming of the Wanneroo Fire Support Bushfire Brigade, and I am moving this item. Would anyone like to second it? Councillor Miles, thank you. It's a very sensible thing to do. I'm very happy about it. I was happy to hear about it from the ICB fire guys who wanted to get it done, and I'm just really happy to be able to facilitate this. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this item?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yes, the Fire Brigade's been discussing these sort of matters with me over the last 12 months. It is their wish, so to speak, and I don't have any issues with it. I know administration have worked hard to make sure it's a smooth transition, and I wish them luck.
Thank you. Any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. and it is passed unanimously. We now go to CSO 1-1024, Financial Activity Statement for the period ended the 31st of August 24. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved, Deputy Mayor Rowe, seconder, Councillor Figg. Deputy Mayor Rowe, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Figg, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed with an absolute majority. Thank you. We now go to transactional finance, CSO 2-1024, warrant of payments for the period to the 31st of August 24. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved, Councillor Herridge. A seconder, please. Councillor Parker. Councillor Herridge, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Parker, would you like to speak to this item?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Do I have any speakers against this item? If there are no speakers against this item, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to Council and Corporate Support, CSO 3-1024, proposal for minor amendment to electronic attendance at meetings policy. Do I have a mover and seconder for this item? Moved, Councillor Bedworth. Do I have a seconder, councillors? Councillor Wright. Councillor Bedworth, do you want to speak to this item?
Only to thank administration for the effort putting into basically a minor tweak to this policy, which provides for a greater flexibility for all of us to attend the non-relevant meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, do you have do you want to speak to this item?
Thank you, Mayor. Other than to say thank you to the administration for taking on feedback, in particular, I'm not going to attempt to say your last name, but the manager of Corporate Council and Support. So I appreciate the time taken for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any speakers against this recommendation? If there are no speakers against this recommendation, please cast your vote. And that's passed unanimously. We now go to item CS 04-1024, policy review on council members' use of city's corporate logo policy. Do I have a mover and seconder for this? Moved, Councillor Wright. Seconder, Councillor Herridge. Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to this item?
Other than to say thank you to the administration for clarifying those extra points around using the city's logo just to avoid any gaps within policy. So thank you.
Councillor Herridge, would you like to speak to this item?
Nothing to add, just to say and echo the same comments as Councillor Wright.
Do I have any speakers against this recommendation? If there are no speakers against this recommendation, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. I now go to CEO 1-1024, Local Government Elections Review of WALGA Advocacy Positions. Do I have a mover and seconder for the substantive, please? Councillor Smith and Councillor Parker. And I'm looking around. Do you have something to say, do you, Councillor Wright?
Thank you, Mayor. You're on fire tonight. I've got an amendment and the seconder is Deputy Mayor Rowe. I believe there may have been a technical difficulty from the administration in providing that as a printed copy. So it is on the screen, I hope. But I did send it out to councillors as well last night and also last week, I believe, as well. And the only part that it's changing is just to support compulsory voting. Are you okay for me to go into?
Yes,
okay.
You may speak to it.
Thank you, Mayor. So just touching on some of the reasons for that, because obviously you guys can't see the reasoning for the amendment, so I will read it out for people. But councillors, sorry. Compulsory voting guarantees a more accurate reflection of the community's will, leading to councils that truly represent the diverse needs and perspectives of their constituents. When everyone participates, council members are held accountable to a broader cross-section of the community, promoting responsive and responsible governance. There is strengthened civic engagement and social cohesion by making voting a shared civic duty. We foster a culture of active participation in local decision making. Empowerment of marginalised groups. Compulsory voting ensures that voices of historically underrepresented groups are heard, reducing the disparities in participation and promoting a more equitable society. The last point, and probably the most important point to really stress and highlight to councillors, and this report was highlighted through the Walga State Council and Walga North Metropolitan Zone around the cost of elections. And in 2023, the final cost for a voluntary City of Wanneroo election was $747,348, with a total of 141,426 electors and a turnout rate of 25.6%. This translates to a per elector cost of $5.28. The financial burden of conducting voluntary elections, coupled with low voter turnout, underscores the need to transition to compulsory voting. Making participation in local elections compulsory would not only increase engagement, but also bring us in line with state and federal elections. This will also lead to potential cost savings as streamlining the election process and reducing the need for extensive voter outreach and encouragement efforts. This also highlights that compulsory voting ensures that every dollar that we put into an election, we actually see a return from it. And I think at the moment, with 25% at a cost of $5.28, every household and every person that doesn't vote, that's $5.28 going straight into the bin that we have to pay for anyway every 2 years. So I just want to highlight that the cost, if we want a better representation, we want people to be engaged in local government. I think it is a good step to support compulsory voting, and it's one of the luxuries that we do have in Australia that really works well for us, and going back to those core principles of being Australian. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe. Deputy Mayor Rowe, would you like to speak to this amendment?
Yes, Mayor. I think you said Councillor Rowe and then Deputy Mayor Rowe. We are not brothers. I can assure you of that. I'll say three things, Mayor, to add some value. One, I thank the councillor for bringing forth the amendment. I do think it adds value. Second, Mayor, it is already in line with our consistent advocacy position on this matter. I sought some clarification from the administration. We've always advocated for compulsory voting, so the councillor's amendment brings us back into line with what our position has always been on the matter. And the third one is really just information, in my opinion, to the state government. If we are having an electoral method imposed upon us that they use for state and federal elections, we should also have the same type of election facilitated format. You can't impose optional preferential voting upon local governments but still keep us as voluntary voting. If we are to be consistent, and that is to be a central theme of the local government reform, it should be consistent across the board.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Rowe. Do we have any speakers against the amendment? Councillor Miles, do you have a question?
I do have a question. I will be speaking against it as well. My question is, and I don't have all of the printout as Councillor Rowe, Councillor Wright, the brother of Councillor Deputy Mayor Rowe. But my question is, the numbers or the figures that Councillor Wright articulated in his opening statements, mainly the $750,000 cost to perform an election of only 20% return, would administration then have an idea that if you had a 100% return of 140,000 ballots currently, that price would probably escalate to over $1 million? Would that be so?
Ms Jennings?
Thank you, Mayor. I wouldn't really be able to say, because it depends how the Electoral Commission actually conducts their work. If you remember last time they actually decided to do it manually, one would hope they would do it then electronically. So it's therefore a bit hard to answer that question, I'm afraid.
Councillor Miles?
Yeah, as we know by the last election, because of the preference, there was a lot of Electoral Commission staff on the floor covering off on all of the wards, in this case 7 wards and plus the mayoral count. But I can't see how you can achieve the hours that were put in last time, and they were extensive. I think it was 2 days or 2.5 days for just the 20% return. I'm not understanding how we can say that the costs would actually be marginally higher. So I would like to get a bit more information on how that would be. Walga should have it, but somebody should have it before I sort of went down the path of supporting this, because I don't believe there's going to be a saving. I understand what's being said, but I'm very keen to understand how those numbers come about. Mayor.
Would that question have to be taken on notice, or are you able to give the answer? No, we're not able to answer it tonight.
Okay, so if you could take that on notice. My other concern is with the compulsory component of local government elections. Does that mean it would be a local government election compulsory every 2 years, not every 4 years like a state government, or 3 years as in federal? So I am concerned. I'm into my statement now, Mayor. I am concerned that by having a compulsory election every 2 years, the ratepayer is going to get mighty unhappy with an extended cost, unless we then advocate for an election every 4 years. And I'm not sure whether Councillor Wright and Deputy Mayor Rowe have asked or indicated or had any discussions around that, because I can just see this being a very substantial cost to the ratepayer. I think also having compulsory voting can also lead to what clearly happens on the East Coast. It doesn't happen here. I know people think it does happen here, where there's politics on the floor of the chamber. It never happens in this chamber, and I've always made sure that I don't do that. But I think if we did compulsory, it would then work in the favour of the major parties to then start running clear candidates to fill the floor with their particular candidates. So that's one of the couple of the reasons why I'm not supporting the compulsory voting at this stage. I did tell Councillor Wright that earlier today, but it's up to Council how they wish to go. But I don't think we've got enough information either from Walga or having any discussion about the real costs, what happens to the 2-year cycle, 4-year cycle, whatever it's going to be. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Do I have a speaker for the amendment? Councillor Figg.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I do acknowledge some of those concerns raised by Councillor Miles, and in particular, the uncertainty around costs. I would predict personally that the return ballots would add to the cost of that at a very base level. In saying that, compulsory voting is something very close to my heart. I think it's one of the most fantastic and valuable aspects of Australian democracy. And I think that it prevents a lot of the issues that we can see in other countries in some elections on occasion. In saying that, I do also acknowledge that having one every 2 years would also be problematic. I do support it on the balance of those issues, and I hope that Council also supports it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a speaker against the amendment? Councillor Bedworth.
Thank you. I'd just like to echo everything Councillor Miles said and just add to that in so much as I stay away from anything that's mandatory or compulsory as much as I can. It's anti-democratic in my opinion. I think you make people do things, then where's the democracy? And just to echo that 2-year cycle would be such a impost. I think for local government, unless we move away from that cycle, I just think making it compulsory would be just too hard. So I won't be supporting this.
Speakers for. Councillor Parker. Is that a question or a speaker for?
This is kind of in between. I had this discussion with somebody that lives in Sydney, and they were quite surprised that we didn't have compulsory voting. And she informed me that if you do not vote, you get a fine of $200. It's going to cover your costs, Paul. Councillor Miles. Just saying. No, seriously, but just saying it was an interesting debate at the time. And I was quite shocked to hear that you got a $200 fine if you did not vote. And that's an enormous amount of money if you're going to add up people that are, for example, not going to vote. But I'll make up my mind. You'll see. But it's just a good conversation.
Okay, I'll take that as a for, Councillor Parker. Do I have a speaker against? If I have no more speakers against, would you like the right of reply, Councillor Wright?
Other than to say it's an advocacy position for Wagga to take on, and they will obviously prepare that position for debate for State Council and provide more information to local governments to make an informed decision. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. So, councillors, could you please cast your vote on the amendment which the amendment supports compulsory voting at local government elections? Please cast your vote. Oh my gosh. So the amendment is passed by 6 votes to 4. Those who supported the amendment was myself, Councillor Road, Councillor Wright, Councillor Smith, Councillor Figg and Councillor Parker. Those who were against the amendment were Councillor Herridge, Councillor Miles, Councillor Berry and Councillor Bedworth. Now we move on to the substantive. Councillor Smith, would you like to speak to the substantive as amended? Councillor Parker, would you like to speak to the substantive as amended?
No, thanks, Madam.
Are there any speakers against the substantive as amended? Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, just to articulate what I just said during the amendment, just to put it on the record, and whilst I understand that is supposed to be an advocacy position, to be quite honest, I'm very disappointed with the Wagga and the way they're conducting their advocacy at the moment. There's a raft of amendments in the Parliament that clearly go against the democracy of council in many, many ways. By referring to a lot of things that are going to go and taken out of council hands and given to our CEO. The other parts of this, as I said, with the voluntary against voluntary or compulsory voting, I think then we need to have that discussion. Do we have a 4-year cycle? You cannot go in there and advocate for a compulsory vote every 2 years. And it will be a higher cost, and it's not hard for administration to find out what that cost would be, because they only have to see what the cost of a general election would be at a state level and how much that is costing the Electoral Commission through the state process, and then just bring it down by voting. It would not be done by ballots in an envelope. I would say that it would be done in person at a school, because you've got too many ballots coming in otherwise to deal with in the room downstairs. It just would not work. So I think for the Wagga delegates that are going to take this up further, I think you have to articulate very clearly some of the cautions that I have put forward. And I think also I would like the delegates to sort of maybe gee up Wagga and start banging the table a bit further on what's going on in the Parliament at this very moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Do I have any speakers for the substantive as amended? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. I think I'm going to take the opportunity to highlight some of those matters that haven't been addressed. And I think it's really important. I know I've sent personal correspondence to the Minister as a resident within the city of Wanneroo, that obviously some of these changes are concerning to residents, such as councils out of DAPs, which is really, really scary, I guess, considering some of these items and councillors not being able to have a say on them. I understand it is an opt-in, opt-out system, but it's sort of moving away from an opt-in, opt-out to an almost, it's a bypass way to get from council. And that is substantially wrong, considering DAPs are 3 state members as opposed to 2 local government members. We're already outnumbered, and sometimes residents actually do have some really good planning considerations that council members and DAP members do need to consider. And I think it's really critical that we still have a part to play in the planning system in WA, and I think that's slowly being eroded over time, which is really concerning. So I do think Walga does need to step up on that part. The other part is highlighting more protection for local government elected members. We are in a front-facing role. You know, state and federal members of parliament do have additional protections from I guess, the WA police and also federal police. It would be nice to see that extended for local government elected members for facing death threats and a lot of other concerns. As we are residents, we do live within our community, but sometimes we do have some disgruntled residents out there that do take it a step too far. And I think none of us signed up to do this. At the end of the day, we are residents. We are trying our best. We do take on board community feedback. We do as much training as what we can to get us up to that standard. But at the end of the day, we're all normal residents from a local community being put into a board level position role to be able to fulfil very extensive and complex legislation. And the last point I wanted to highlight as well, and I know Walga is taking this up further in regards to the WAEC cost of elections and not having a agreed service level agreement for local governments and having a clear demonstration of what that cost allocation method is and how that overall sum that local governments get charged is broken down into. Because over the years it's continued to increase. As Deputy Mayor Rose elaborated on, the introduction of optional preferential voting has added more challenges to this process, but also the possibility of exploring and introducing private service providers or other providers to do that election process, to obviously have a bit of competition. So I do hope Walga does take note of some of these, as I do know other councillors from other local governments do listen to our live recordings. So I hope that some other councils also pick up on some of this commentary. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Do I have any speakers against the substantive as amended? If there are no speakers against, councillors, could you please cast your vote? Oh, actually, Councillor Smith, do you want the right of reply? Councillors, please cast your vote. And this item has been passed 8-2. Those supporting this recommendation is myself, Councillor Rowe, Councillor Herridge, Councillor Wright, Councillor Berry, Councillor Smith, Councillor Figg and Councillor Parker. The councillors who didn't support this recommendation was Councillor Miles and Councillor Bedworth. We now go to item CEO 2-1024. Do I have a mover and seconder for this? This is the Audit and Risk Committee Terms of Reference and Review. Yes, Deputy Mayor Rowe. Do I have a seconder for this item? Councillor Parker. Deputy Mayor Rowe, would you like to speak to this item?
I would, Mayor. I hesitate to keep council here too much longer. I do want to acknowledge the work that the administration has done. I think they've listened extensively to the committee as to the structure, the way in which agendas are prepared. All the terms of reference, I think, in the end, are a document that responds to our views as a committee and then also the changes in the legislation that are being imposed upon us by the state government. So I would want to make one point. The state government has required that the chairperson and the deputy chairperson of this committee become independent members upon the new legislation taking effect. I do think personally, upon reflection, that hasn't given enough of a grace period for councils to be able to find independent members. The fact that there's going to be more than 130 local governments seeking independent members at any given time, even if there is a list of qualified persons prepared, it's going to present operational challenges for each local government. I appreciate the point that some councils may be able to band together and share a person who will undertake the role of the independent member. I think the other concern that I have through yourself, Mayor, is that the state government is not only requiring us to have an independent member who has qualified skills in auditing or risk management, but it's also mandating that they take on the role of the presiding member. So it's asking them to have to preside over the meetings and also utilise their skills and expertise to add value to our committee. I don't think it is a well thought out legislative reform imposed upon us by state government. I don't think there was significant consultation that occurred as part of this sweeping reforms that have been brought in. Obviously, we will accept and make do with what we've got and make the best of the situation, but I do think we were functioning incredibly well as an Audit and Risk Committee with council members, and the addition of an independent member is one thing, but to immediately promote them to the position of presiding member, I think, is the wrong choice.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Rowe. Councillor Parker, would you like to speak to this item?
Nothing further to add, but would like to thank Deputy Mayor Rowe for the comments that you have just made. And I know I'm going to miss you as chair, so absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers against this recommendation? If there are no speakers against this recommendation, councillors, please cast your vote. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to item CEO 3-1024, the tender 24076 for the provision of internal audit services. There are confidential items on this recommendation, so if you want to speak to the confidential attachments, we will need to go behind closed doors. So I'll just leave that as you want to discuss to bring it up. Deputy Mayor Rowe, you want to move it. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wright. Deputy Mayor Rowe, would you like to speak to this?
Just to thank the administration for the procurement process that they've gone through, thorough, and it also has provided us with clarification when we have asked questions in both the other room and here behind closed doors, Mayor. To thank the number of tenderers who submitted applications and obviously to commend the report to Council.
Thank you. Councillor Wright, do you want to speak to this item?
I don't know, I'm tired, but only to add to thank obviously William Buck for their service to the Audit and Risk Committee and from Council to look forward to working with Paxson. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Are there any speakers against this recommendation? Absolutely not. Councillors, go to the vote, please. And that is passed unanimously. We now go to MN 01-1024, a motion on notice by Councillor Wright about Kemp Street traffic management. Do you have a seconder for this motion on notice, Councillor Wright?
It was supposed to be Councillor Huntley.
Councillor Miles is the seconder. Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to your motion on notice?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I think I've spoken enough tonight, but this particular item was my first motion on notice to Council back in 2021. It has taken some time to obviously do all those traffic treatments, to consult with residents, and I think I understand that that threshold that Council has set hasn't been met. However, I just want to highlight that, and in particular, the report that we received on the local traffic management policy, administration highlighted a particular comment that several roads with operating speeds above 10 kilometres per hour over the posted speed limit that scored below the required 60, and this is due to not being many other score generating factors such as low or zero recorded crash history. And I think this road is a pure example that there is speeding existing on this road, but there thankfully hasn't been any accidents to date yet. You would have seen from attachment 1 the survey that I conducted through a letter drop back in 2021, asking residents for their feedback, and that was dropped to every single household on Kemp Street, and 56 responded, and that shows that there's a clear demonstration within the street that they are supportive of traffic treatments of some sort. Obviously, I will leave the design and the technicality to the administration to come up with, but along that there is some sort of treatment. It is beneficial for those residents on that street that do frequent obviously the traffic, and obviously with the upgrades to Lenore Road, there is going to be more traffic coming in that area. There's subdivision currently occurring in Pearsall at random spots. So there is more dwellings that are supposed to be popping up over the next 2-3 years. I do think it is should be our responsibility to be able to assist with that, at the same time with the WA police being able to enforce compliance as well. So I think it is a joint team effort, and I do thank the local member for Lansdale for being able to work with me on this issue and for submitting constituent inquiries to the city as well. I've been keeping a note of administration's responses, so that's led me to tonight's motion on notice to council. So hope you can support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this motion on notice?
Yeah, I'll be briefly. And look, I know that Councillor Wright, when he first got elected, this was one of those top issues that he had when he first came onto council. He wasn't a graduate then, Mayor, but now he is a graduate. I'm guessing that's why we've got it back again. But Kemp Street is one of those inter-suburban sort of style roads. It is an active road. It's designed to be active. But it goes back to what I was asking administration last week on precinct 7, and some of the road infrastructure there, and also with an earlier report when we talked about roads and how are we assessing them appropriately at the design phase when we do a suburb like Pearsall. A lot of the roads are just straightforward racetrack roads. They're wide. In this case, Kemp Street has a sort of a bit of a brow heel in there. Councillor Wright is correct. There's a small little subdivision being done now at Kemp Street with a off sort of, it's not even a crossover, it's been offset. And I'm assuming that's to help with some of the traffic flow within the area, but it's right opposite a laneway. So it is one of those suburbs that I think, if I go back to thinking about it, was put together by multiple developers, and it never had a whole approach to the road infrastructure as what we're doing today. We are getting, I think we've done a lot better in some of our newer suburbs. I do support looking at ways of easing traffic congestion on these streets. I know administration 15 years ago did like Taywood Drive. They put in some central trees to give that perception of a smaller road width, so people and buses and that can still get down. I would like maybe some of that to be considered rather than just putting, bollards across a road or dips in the road to attempt to slow traffic down. It doesn't work. It actually adds to noise within the houses around there because all they hear all night is thump, thump. And you'll get another complaint because of the noise that the bumps are there. So having sort of tree gardens centralised at points along the road, I do support that. It worked very well when it was first done in Connolly, and I would hope administration would look at those sort of active and constructive ways of meeting other challenges that we're trying to do with our tree canopy. But other than that, happy that Councillor Wright has brought it to Council for another review, and obviously the Director of Assets will need to action it.
Thank you. I just have a question. Mr Singh, is Kemp Road wide enough to use chicanes?
Thank you, Mayor. We haven't gone into that detail yet, what kind of treatments can be installed in this particular street. The motion actually is requesting, if it gets carried through tonight, that we develop a suitable traffic management scheme. As part of development of scheme, we'll look at what is possible, what's not possible, and then come up with a concept plan.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Rowe.
Just one question, Mayor. I note from the report that administration says, first off, I'm supportive of what Councillor Wright's doing, but the report says that administration measured the traffic, the speed and the volume of vehicles west, I think it was, of Brooklyn Avenue. My understanding that section between Brooklyn Avenue and Archer Street is not where the problem occurs. It's actually closer to Lenore Road, which is subject to the future dualling in the near future. So my question through yourself, Mayor, is if Councillor Wright's motion is successful, in addition to what he's requesting, I'm assuming the administration would be undertaking another traffic assessment for other sections of the road so they have a more complete view. And if that is the case, Mayor, can the Director provide any time frame?
Mr Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. When this motion was being drafted, we at that time listed a need for traffic counts in our schedule. If this is approved tonight, we will be undertaking traffic count later this week, starting later this week for a 1 week period. The reason for that is we have to do traffic counts during school term. So given that's only a few weeks left, so we will be undertaking those traffic counts from the end of this week to the next week.
Thank you. Any speakers against this motion on notice? If there are no speakers against this motion on notice, do you really want the right of reply, Councillor Wright?
I'm feeling the love tonight.
Councillors, cast your vote. And that was passed unanimously, councillors. I hope you're happy with that, Councillor Wright. We now go to motion on notice MN 02-1024 from Councillor Smith, Community Facility Design Principles. Councillor Smith, you have a seconder.
I do, Councillor Miles, thank you.
You're popular tonight, Paul. Councillor Wright, would you like to speak to this item? Councillor Smith, would you like to speak to this item? It's getting late.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, we are family.
As we know, the city has a significant number of community facilities to deliver in a long-term financial plan, many in the multi-million-dollar category. I'm coming up to nearly 2 years being on council, and it's been a really interesting process being in meetings with other projects coming along the pipeline and seeing them in towards the end of their design phase and things like that, and having seen and questions and decisions about changing scope of the projects and impacts to community and managing their expectations in terms of, you know, when they were consulted and what they're envisioning. So I started having some conversations with the CEO and Councillor Miles and myself met with the CEO and some of the team to understand the process of how designs come about for the purpose of working out if there was any strategic value that the council could propose in a motion to increase the cost effectiveness and the consistency of standard for our designs. So through these meetings, we believe that a design policy for community facilities would allow councillors to have a say in the potential creation of guiding principles of design and help provide clarity of ownership because the designs come over are contributed by multiple departments. So that's an important one to identify. And also be an ability to foster a culture of good design, especially when we have staff turnover and things like that. Just having the ability to set a vision for some standard principles that we can work our designs to. However, instead of calling in this motion to go straight to the endorsement of a policy, I recognise that the other councillors haven't gone through that journey that Councillor Miles and myself have gone in terms of our research and our discussions. So what I'm asking for is that you support the idea of the administration coming up with a discussion paper on a number of these points and bring it to us in a workshop where we can discuss the worth and so we can all make an informed decision on that so we all feel prepared and not ambushed by that. So I'll finish with this. A design-focused culture increases local government's capacity to deliver high-quality outcomes with enduring value for the community. I invite my fellow councillors to support this motion for a discussion paper and workshop so the idea can be discussed. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Miles, would you like to speak to this motion on notice?
Just briefly, yeah. Look, I just totally endorse what Councillor Smith has highlighted in her opening remarks to the item tonight, councillors, and it is about looking at ways of. It's not always about cutting costs. It was just initially to try and understand how some of our facilities are designed, and from that point. And it was very clear, and I do want to thank the CEO for being involved, because it was sort of clear that there was no one person or one director or one manager that had any control, I wouldn't say control, but any point of saying we own this project and we need to design it this way and what have you. I sort of came to the conclusion towards the end that maybe we sort of do need to have maybe a property team only, that they can then obviously come to council and say, this is the designs you can have and it's going to cost you $10 or $12 million or whatever, rather than some of the ideas that we've got floating around now. Standardise internal, maybe have some different fascias depending on the area and the function of the space needed around it. But on the whole, the recommendation is straightforward. Chief Executive Officer to present a discussion paper to a future council forum, and I know that he's very keen to try and get something done early in the new year as per his administration comment. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Do I have any speakers against this motion on notice? If I have no speakers against this motion on notice, councillors, please cast your vote. And there's one against, which was Councillor Herridge, and 9 supporting. Now we go behind closed doors. Do I have a mover and seconder to go behind closed doors for confidential? Moved Councillor Figg, seconded Councillor Parker. Can we please vote to go behind closed doors? Someone's missing. And we unanimously go behind closed doors for our confidential item. Thank you. And then I'll do the recommendation and close it down, just so that you're aware there'll be a ping when we're back on air.
Yeah.
Whether Amanda remembers to do it or not, I don't know. And as far as item CR01 1024, Bushfire Brigades Local Law 2024 undertakings, that recommendation was passed unanimously. We now go to item 12, date of the next meeting. The next council members briefing session has been scheduled for 6 p.m. on Tuesday the 5th of November to be held at Council Chambers, Civic Centre, 23 Dundebar Road, Wanneroo. And item 13, I declare the meeting closed at 9:30 p.m. Thank you, councillors.